The time is 7:03. Welcome to this meeting of the Wooddale Community Development Commission. My name is Jamie Ochoa. I am the chairman for the Wooddale Community Development Commission. Ms. Secretary, can you please do roll call?
Yes, Mr. Babowis.
Here.
Mr. Ochoa.
Here.
Mr. Peterson is not here. Mr. Shemanik is absent. Mr. Surma.
Here.
Ms. Zadko.
Here.
And Mr. Woods.
Here.
Okay, the CDC has a quorum present. Moving on, we need a motion to approve the meeting minutes from January 17, 2022.
So moved. I'll make that motion.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, there being a motion and a second, all in favor signifying so by saying yes.
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 Okay, the motion carries, the minutes are approved. Moving on on to our public hearing for tonight. I will kindly ask Mr. Conway, as chairman, I request that you facilitate the meeting tonight.
Certainly. All right, welcome everybody. We have a full house, so thank you for coming out and sharing your interest with this matter. For our public hearings, all testimony will be given under oath. At the hearing, there'll be an opportunity for the public to offer testimony and to comment. Following the public hearing, the CDC's deliberations will be open to the public in the sense that all are invited to listen and watch. The public, however, may not speak during the CDC's deliberations. Please be advised that this is a formal legal proceeding that is being recorded. Staff and the city's consultants will provide a general description of the proposal followed by their analysis. With respect to others who wish to speak, you may give an opinion or present specific evidence regarding this matter. Prior to making any statements, kindly approach the podium and speak into the microphone. We'll be asking you to provide your name and address and just to provide a spelling of your name for our recorder. Finally, we'll strictly adhere to the schedule prepared for tonight's hearing. However, those wishing to submit evidence and testimony will be afforded sufficient time within which to do so. Whether you are a member of the public wishing to make a statement for the record or a testifying witness, you'll be placed under oath and then begin by stating your name and address. You'll be subject to questions by the Community Development Commission and potential cross-examination. To allow as many people as possible the time to be heard, we request that you limit your remarks to 5 minutes. I'm going to call tonight's matter, which is CDC 2022-02. This case involves the City of Wooddale's proposal for a comprehensive rewrite of the Unified Development Ordinance, Chapter 17 of the Wooddale Municipal Code, and a map amendment rezoning of properties located within the city. What I want to start with tonight, because we do have a number of folks here, we're going to do what's called a mass swearing in. So if you intend on providing comment or any statements tonight, I'd ask that you please stand and raise your right hand. Yes. Okay.
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Okay, great. We'll begin with staff. Can you please indicate when notice of the hearing was published and whether you have certificate of publication from the newspaper?
Gosha Pucheha, 404 North Wooddale Road. I apologize. I guess we were sworn in, so I don't have to do that anymore. So yes, a notice was published in Daily Herald, and we also send out notices to property owners for properties that are proposed to be rezoned. A copy of the certificate of publication from Daily Herald is on file with the city.
Okay. All right. And I believe, staff, you have a presentation. You may proceed in whatever order you choose.
Perfect. So I'll just provide a brief introduction, and then I'll hand the microphone over to our consultant. With us tonight, we have Michael Blue from Tuska Associates and David Silverman from Ansel and Glink. Both of those firms provided the actual draft. They worked on the assessment of our existing UDO and then provided the draft that we reviewed as staff and also with the UDO steering committee. So I'll try to keep it brief because I know we do have a lot of people who may be interested in speaking today. So in terms of the background, the whole project really goes back 2019, so it was August of 2019. That was the first time when the city council authorized an audit of our existing UDO, just to see, you know, how valid it is to current market standards and how applicable the zoning regulations are. Move forward to December of 2019, that's when the city council authorized the full rewrite. There were a couple options that are being considered. So in December, the city council authorized the project that we are essentially reviewing right now. Over the next couple years, we held UDO steering committee meetings. UDO steering committee consisted of members of the public and also a few of the aldermen. And the idea was that they reviewed a couple sections at a time and they provided comments back. The last meeting was held in January, so the draft that is being presented during this public hearing is essentially a compilation of all of the articles that have previously been reviewed by the UDO steering committee and by staff. In terms of the purpose of this entire project, so the main goal, one of the main goals, was to make the UDO more user-friendly. We, as city staff, have received multiple complaints from developers, from the public, that they didn't really understand our zoning ordinance because things were in different places or they didn't always make sense. So that was one of the things. We needed to clean it up, reorganize it. Graphics were added that essentially are meant to be a lot more helpful to anyone looking for guidance and regulations, to modernize the UDO also, because the original document is from 2009. Obviously, that's been quite some time ago. A lot has changed in the development world, so we just wanted to bring it a little bit up to current standards and also incorporate the comprehensive plan that was updated in 2018. One of the goals or items that were mentioned during the comprehensive plan project was to update the UDO to make it more consistent. In terms of the public comments, so I'll jump right into it. What the CDC members received are copies of the written public comments that city staff have received. We've had about 16 individuals contact city staff. A lot of them were clarifying questions. They received a notice about the public hearing, and they were curious how is that going to affect their property. Most of them we were able to provide the answer, and they understood, and they didn't have any further comments. The 3 hard copy letters that we did receive, one of them is from the Forest Preserve District. Essentially, they mentioned that they really don't have any comments or objections. We have one from a property owner, 415 East Irving Park Road. This is an owner of a multifamily residential building, essentially, and he had some concerns on how rezoning of his property from C1 to C2 will affect his property. And then we also have a comment that was received earlier today regarding industrial properties, and this is more specifically, they're in the overlay district, but the underlying zoning is I1. As we will talk about briefly, and as was mentioned in the memo, we're combining the industrial zoning districts into 2, and their concerns were with how those standards that will be applied now to I1 will affect their properties, and mainly because the properties are smaller, they don't meet the minimum size of the property. So that's kind of just an overall summary of the comments. And with that, I will change the presentation over.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, city attorney, members of the public. I always apologize for my back, I'm sorry. Again, as Gretchen said, my name is Michael Blue. I'm a principal with Tesca Associates, working with Ansel Glink. We prepared the update to the UDO. A couple words about Tesca, and then Ansel Glink and myself and David. Tesca is a land use, zoning, and urban design firm, been around for about 45 years. I have not been with the firm that long. Do all form of planning and zoning work. We do comprehensive plans. We're the firm that prepared the comprehensive plan. We're the lead firm that prepared the comprehensive plan for the city, which the UDO update helps to adopt. As for myself, I've been with Tesca for about 9 years. Prior to that, I was a community development director and a deputy community development director for 15 years, so I've been a zoning administrator myself. And we brought a lot of that experience to what we've got here. David, may I get you to say a couple words about yourself and the firm?
Sure. As Michael said, good evening, and I am David Silverman. I'm a partner at Ansel Glink in Chicago. I head up our firm's land use and zoning practice. Tesca and Ansel Glink work frequently on doing zoning code updates and rewrites such as the one for Wooddale. In my spare time, I also teach the land use course at UIC Law School. So we bring we build in the legal review process as part of the overall rewrite of your zoning code. So it's an active process that we've created between our two firms. And we are a firm that predominantly represents public bodies, such as municipalities and park districts, and we also do private developer work as well.
So we have a presentation. It is an overview. It is the context. A lot of it is the explanation of why what has changed, which we trust will be useful to you and the folks that are here. We're not going to touch on every detail, but as there are questions, we can address them or get back to you with answers for that. So we'd like to go through, as I said, a bit of the context, talk about each section, what are the major changes in those sections, and then obviously question and discussion. So if that's all right, we'll dive right in. We'll dive right in. So in terms of where this came from, as Gosha mentioned, the update to the UDO was a recommendation of the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is not, just so that we're all on the same page and everybody knows, the comprehensive plan is not a set of laws and regulations. It is a set of policies that cities follow. It includes recommendations on how to implement the plan and how to implement those policies. So updating the UDO, as Gosha mentioned, there were a number of reasons to do that, was one of the recommendations of the comprehensive plan. That's how we then took the step, as she mentioned, about doing the assessment, and then ultimately got to where we are now in terms of the update. And again, just so we're on the same page and so everybody kind of gets a sense of what zoning and the UDO is, right? The difference between a zoning ordinance and a UDO, a Unified Development Code, is that the UDO also includes aspects that relate to subdivision. So it's not just zoning, but it's also the subdivision, which is the process of dividing properties of land. And I know you all know this. I'm trying to share a little bit so everybody is on the same page. The zoning is the regulation. The zoning is the law, right? And it regulates the use of the land. It regulates the size of the properties, where the buildings are located. It regulates how tall, the amount of land can be covered, so on and so forth. The thing that's important to know is that it's unique to every community, right? So Wooddale and Bensonville do not have the same zoning ordinance. They might have some similarities, but they don't have the same zoning ordinance. A zoning ordinance is kind of a UDO. It's kind of a personalized implementation of the comprehensive plan. So it's not one size fits all. That's why it's custom. That's why it's taken a couple of years to go through the process to do it. In terms of the process, Gosha showed a version of this, but I would just highlight on the point, as she mentioned, we started with the assessment. The assessment included interviews with stakeholders and those that are involved with properties in the community. We did a series of updates for the city council, but the ultimate drafting was in those phases that Gosha showed you the details on over a couple of years, quite honestly, that we did with the steering committee at those public meetings. When we did the assessment, from our perspective, what were some of the main issues of what was in there? The UDO, the zoning aspect of the UDO, and without getting really into the weeds and all this planning stuff, had an approach to regulation of what's called form-based code, right? It's not traditional zoning. It's more about what does the building look like than what goes on in it. The code that Wooddale had prior to the draft before you was a bit of a hybrid. It had some of each. That kind of accounted for some of the challenges that Gosha was talking about. So the idea of an update to a code like this is to either go all in on the form-based or to, frankly, leave it behind for something that's a little more familiar, a little easier for customers to use. In a built-up community like this, it's really the traditional form of zoning that made more sense. The other was the organization of the code. It's codified online, it's easy to look up online, it's easy to search for things, but there is, if you read a lot of zoning, I kind of hope you don't, but if you read a lot of different zoning ordinances, you find that there's a traditional flow to them. There are aspects of it that jump out at you that are easy to find because they're used most often, right? Parking is a really great example. A lot of those things are kind of hidden in the chapters of the current code. So that's a really easy one to talk about, bringing up to the forefront so that people can find it easier. So the organization of the code, again, as Gosha mentioned, is important because you want those that are looking at your code to understand that you've got a good handle on it and that it's a modern, usable code. One of the other major issues with the code was the use list. So if you're familiar with the use list in your own code, if you've scrolled through it on the computer or turned through the pages, you'll see that there are just pages and pages and lines and lists and tremendous detail of the different types of specific uses that are allowed. This is long gone as a best practice. Because businesses change so quickly, technology changes so quickly, to try and list the specific types of uses is really, it's just not the best practice anymore. And we'll get into this a little bit, but the idea is to use categories of uses, which makes it easier for property owners to bring new businesses to their sites, makes it easier for staff to interpret, makes it easier for the CDC to work with. So that was I was going to say 30 seconds, but it was longer than that. That was the brief kind of update of why this was a good idea to do. We're not going to turn page by page, but we are going to go section by section. We'd like to highlight for you some of the key changes. And I'll talk to the sections that we took the lead on drafting. David will speak to the ones that they took the lead on drafting. So the first section of the code is kind of the preamble. It's the whys and wherefores. Why do we have this? How do we have this? It's sort of the how-to of it. It's the why do we have the code and how do you use this code? The one that you had in the current UDO is really kind of lengthy, longer than you typically see, and it was a little bit outdated. But you know what? It was really good. It told a great story about development in the community, and so the changes that we made were really about modernizing it. Making it more current. It was not current. So that we did not change a whole lot. This section also contains the definitions. Definitions are a very important part of the code in terms of how they relate to being able to identify uses, being able to understand where things can be. It's a very important tool for staff to make use of. So some of the things we did with the definitions. Again, you see this word again about modernizing, and that's what we did. I mentioned the categories. So instead of listing flower shop, record store, I don't know if there's record store, flower shop, record store, all sorts of retail shops, right? What's listed in the code or in the proposed update is that categories that just say indoor retail sales, or instead of barbershop, salon, those are personal services. So that if there's something not listed, there's a whole rigmarole, that's a technical term, there's a whole rigmarole that a property owner has to go through to get a use approved. The category makes it easier for that to happen. There were a bunch of definitions that related to that form-based aspect. We took those out. The development standards that relate, the definitions that relate to standards, like I say here, height, building height, lot lines, those sorts of things, grades, we didn't change those because we didn't want to create nonconformity. So we generally didn't want to change the way somebody's setback is determined or height is determined. So we didn't change that. We modernized from updated terms. Nursing home, not a term you hear a lot in the industry anymore. Skilled care facility is obviously more common. There are a few of those that we changed. Every once in a while we find fallout shelter in a zoning ordinance. We take that out because that's kind of a historic term. The term family is no longer a wise term to use, and I can let David opine on it, but really the use of family is no longer appropriate as the measure of overcrowding, for instance, is how a lot of communities use it. Building codes are a much better tool. There are better tools to use than a definition of family, which today can be harder to define. The other thing we did, if you even turn through, I hope you notice that there's more graphics. that were included and updated in there, just to make it easier to use, so that when you're talking about a patio or a deck, there's a little more help to try and figure out the difference.
Okay, on the administration and enforcement side, we took the lead on this chapter. This tends to be where all the legal activity out of a zoning code comes from, because it's how this code's gonna, how the UDO is gonna be administered, how it's gonna be enforced, all the processes that property owners and other land use applicants have to go through, notice requirements, public hearing requirements, findings of facts, standards for different types of review. We basically rewrote the entire provision to make it easier to navigate. It tends to be in almost any type of zoning code one of the longest chapters, if not the longest chapter. And we also consolidated other parts of the code into this one. So we revised the regulations to authorize a development administrator to enforce the UDO that is clearly established, as well as administer site plan and design review processes. These have now become administrative processes. Incorporating legally defensible criteria for evaluating zoning applications. Very important, everything you do needs to be objectively handled based on the evidence before you and as presented by property owners. Clarified, elaborated upon the Community Development Commission's role. It's now very well set out in there, including the full extent of powers that would typically be associated with the Community Development Commission. We also incorporated the various planning policies and documents. As Michael said a few minutes ago, your comprehensive plan is a very important foundational device, foundational policy document for the regulations that come out of the UDO. And so when the city attorney has to defend a zoning action on the city's part, it's always very good to have a close tie-in between the comp plan and the UDO regulations, so that it's not like the regulations were just spun out of thin air. There was some thought that was given to them to achieve some of the city's goals and objectives. Along those lines, we added procedures that require amendments to the comp plan where applicants are seeking zoning changes that are contrary to existing plan policies and future land use map. The advantage to this is it doesn't prevent you from, of course, making changes along the way. It keeps your comprehensive plan very current, so that in another 5, 10 or so years, you have a very clear picture of the development patterns and the types of development that have been going on in the community because the comp plan has been kept current with those actual development trends that have been happening. And it makes it easier as a basis for evaluation on updates to the comprehensive plan to tweak or otherwise go wholesale different directions with land use policies and regulations. We reorganized and drafted consistent sections on various forms of zoning procedure, so those should be easier to navigate through for applicants, and expanded the enforcement and penalty provisions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes.
The new Article 3 is the article about general provisions. General provision is sort of the catch-all. Sometimes I jokingly refer to it as the kitchen junk drawer of the zoning ordinance. This is where the things that apply more broadly across the community will be found. And so one of the things that we had to change was to go back to lot development standards from building types. So if you're familiar with the code now, you know that it's got type 1, type 2. It's got all these types of buildings, right? And so type 7 up here is the example of what's in the code. Don't worry that you can't read it. It's what's in the current code. But type 7, a type 7 building is an apartment building. And it's got a bunch of standards in here. This is where the hybrid part comes in. This is the part that didn't really work and created a lot of confusion. So what we've done, and you'll see it in just a second, is gone to a more traditional version of this. So we fully stepped away from the form-based aspect of this. Number 2 up here lists the sections that were already somewhere in the UDO, and we've compiled them here. Accessory structures, outdoor dining, adult regulations, refuse, so you can read them here. I don't need to read the slide to you. There were a few things that were added. Again, the notion of modernizing, right? There's new businesses, there's new types of things that communities are faced with. And so a lot of times when you're faced with it, you'll end up amending the code kind of on the fly if somebody comes to you with a new use. The idea here was to do it in advance, and so there's regulations in here now for short-term rentals, environmental energy systems, solar and wind, medical cannabis, which is based on a policy that the city already had, and even collection boxes. The other thing we did is we updated just a little bit, tweaked the home-based business requirements that are in the code. They're pretty much the same in terms of number of employees and space, the percentage of the space that can be, but it's more specifically based on the impact that could happen. I think one of the more significant changes that got made here, the ones that can affect property owners, is we started to talk about garages and the garage requirements that are in the code. The code currently allows a garage up to about 1,200 square feet. It's a lot of garage, and so we raised the question as to whether or not that's a problem. In some places it's a problem because people set up workshops and they do things that create noise and whatnot. So in working with the steering committee, we landed on the idea of something a little smaller would be okay. We didn't want to make them tiny. Like I said, look at the slide says 800 square feet is kind of your basic two-car garage. So the code allows for a little bit bigger, allows it to be 17 feet tall to a peaked roof, or 13 feet to a flat roof, mostly with the intent, as the steering committee discussed it, was that people could have a garage, but the idea was not to impact a neighboring property with so large or so tall a building. So Article 4 is about development districts, and this is where the most changes occurred. This is probably the area that the most questions will come from. But this is the different zoning districts, and you've got the map in front of you. And so what we did here was we looked to implement a couple of things. One were the policy recommendations of the comprehensive plan. Two was to apply the standards of good development of property. As I mentioned, our firm does all manner of planning and design and whatnot. We've got a bunch of landscape architects. We also work a little bit with private sector clients. So we have a pretty good understanding of how development happens from the property owner's perspective, from the developer's perspective. And what we did was we looked at the properties, particularly along Irving Park Road, and thought, all right, if these are going to develop in a way that is, one, beneficial to the property owner because it helps them maximize what they can do, two, is in keeping with the intent of the comprehensive plan, and three, is in keeping with the policies generally of the city, what should that look like? And that's kind of the preamble to what I'm going to run through here. So in terms of the bulk standards, again, like I mentioned, we took that table that had all those other numbers in it and made a more conventional, easier to read version of the standards, which you can see here on the right side. So we shifted from the form-based to the more district-based kind of standards. In figuring out what these should be, we looked at what was on the ground. We looked at the 2008 code, which was in place before the form-based code was developed. And in fact, the 2008 code informed the building type standards in the form-based code, and we've maintained those. Again, and I'm stopping on this point here because the idea was to not create a ton of changes. The idea was to look at how the city was built, how that's consistent, and how that runs through. So we have been respectful as best we could in terms of the setbacks and standards that have been in place for the built up aspects of the community, and clearly and present them a little bit more clearly. The other significant change that I mentioned a little bit about was one is the purpose statements. Every zoning district should have a purpose statement, and there were purpose statements in the current code. We updated them so that to distinguish them a little bit. Some of them were very similar to others, and we were sure that they reflected the policy direction of the comprehensive plan. The uses in the table have been modernized and simplified. That's that idea of using categories rather than individual uses. So you don't have to list health club, membership group, swim club, and there's a bunch of others. These are indoor athletic facilities or indoor recreational activities or outdoor recreational activities. So you don't have to have a separate line for all of them. I think when you print it out, the current code has got about 9 or 10 pages of uses listed, and it's down to 2 now because of the categories. That's done not to eliminate uses, but to just put them in groups so they're easier to understand and facilitate and be reviewed by staff and the city. This is just an example of what it looks like. Again, it should look pretty familiar compared to what you have, but the use categories are in there, and this is just a slide to give a little clue of what's in there. The comprehensive plan looked long and hard at Irving Park Road. There were 3 separate sub-areas that were devoted to Irving Park Road. The central area where we are now, and then obviously the 2 edges to east and west. And from a comprehensive planning standpoint, from a general planning standpoint, those areas have very different characters in terms of the types of businesses that are there, the types of uses that are there, the size of the lots, the way the lots are orientated, so on and so forth. And so as the UDO has been set up, the current one, there's kind of a hierarchy, right? So the C1 is meant to be more neighborhood kind of commercial, smaller businesses, smaller lots, smaller developments. The C2 is larger development. So Target is the perfect example of what C2 is supposed to be about, but it was used to regulate other areas too, as you can see here on the existing map down at the east end on the north side of Irving Park Road. And across from where Target is, all that area that's C1, well, per the definition of the zoning code, that's supposed to be very small, single-user kind of oriented things. Well, that's where the Starbucks and 7-Eleven just went in. I mean, those are larger, attract people from all over the region. So the C1 and the C2 are not mapped the way they're described in the code. So there's a disconnect there. The other thing that kind of jumps off the page here is the application of the I-1 district down at the east end of the corridor. This is the exact same district that applies at the north end of town up along I-390. And the idea that you would regulate these small lots and this area with that same kind of development, it just doesn't work. They're so apples and oranges. So that really called for a change in the code. So these are the new things that grew out of this. You see the C2 applied at the west end on the south side of Irving Park Road, where larger developments can be put together, where more regional development, more tax-based producing development, more rent-producing development can happen. There were a couple of properties towards the center of the area where the TCB, which is a really interesting little kind of almost downtown-ish district that's tied to where the train station is, which is meant to be mixed use, to have residential above, for instance, or have residential be part of it. There were a couple of properties that are in the core that really present an opportunity to have a higher and better use there. When you get down to the other end, to the east end, you see that there's a little bit of C2 there because you've got a larger development potential there. C1, which is those smaller lots, that's really what the C1 was originally for. And so that's why it's been applied there. The 2 things that were created out of whole cloth were the C3 that's there. The C3 was intended to address a unique little business district that's across the street from people's homes. And it's an area that's been there for a while. There's logic to it being there. It's up against the train tracks, makes sense. It's been a code enforcement issue for the city over the years. And what we did and what the steering committee looked at was the idea of taking that district and essentially defining what it is now and having that be the rules for it. So to kind of just put a frame around what's already there was the idea. I'm still talking to the wrong map, my apologies. Again, the C2 at the west end across the street from where Target is logical because it's a larger area. The TCB in the middle of town, because it's in keeping with the character of that, with the transit-oriented type of development. There you see the C3 that I was talking about, just north of Potter with the homes across the street. And then the thing that's interesting about that C2A is it's basically a C2 area, but it's got more depth than most of C2 does. And as I'll show you in the graphic in just a minute, these graphics are in the code, there's really a unique opportunity there to create a bigger development with a sense of place. right? That's not necessarily possible elsewhere. And what we wanted to do was to have the UDO be kind of ready for that to happen. So if somebody wants to come and do that, then that gets facilitated. So the town center, the TCB, again, not a ton of change to this, just the intent that the minimum lot requirements are set to encourage lot consolidation. So where you've got development typically is going to happen, redevelopment it's going to happen just because of the setbacks and the parking requirements is going to require a larger lot. I'm sure you've seen a lot of this as you've looked at development proposals over the years in your time on the commission, but a larger lot allows for more development. And the TCB is kind of set up to do that, and the change requires a slightly larger lot. The setbacks have been set to create this kind of structure here, and if this works, I'll do this, so that the red are the property lines, and then what you've got is a landscape area, the drive area, some parking out in front, and some parking behind. Again, this is very much what's out there now. All we've done is change the UDO to reflect that character. And the same is true of the C1 and the C2. Again, this talks a little bit about some of the things that I've mentioned. It's got some of the details in there. In terms of the C1, like I mentioned, it's not consistent with the way it was mapped. It's rezoned now to be more appropriate at the east end of Irving Park Road. In terms of the C2, again, kind of the opposite. We've increased the minimum lot size to encourage the kind of Starbucks, 7-Eleven development that's happened, because, again, that's more where development is going these days. Larger developments facilitate cleaner development and more opportunity. Without getting into a lot of detail, and I'm glad to discuss it further, but this whole C2A idea is the opportunity to go all the way back to the railroad tracks here, cross the alley, create a substantial development that's got a little court, a little plaza, could be the parking area, that could also be something different. So there's a lot of opportunities to what can happen here. And so if somebody were to come by and put together enough property to do this, this district is now set up to facilitate that happening, to encourage it. If somebody came and said, you know what, I just want to do this part here, the code also facilitates that. And just for kind of like understanding, this is kind of about the size, that building pad's kind of about the size of a Walgreens, right? So you can imagine either this being developed all in one piece with all these different kind of buildings that relate to each other, or you can imagine somebody just taking this piece and doing something like a Walgreens or a CVS on it. It's there to create just that kind of flexibility. And if it stays the way it is, the code allows that too through the non-conforming section. In terms of the industrial, we've consolidated the I-1 and the I-2. The biggest difference between these is the size of the lots, understanding that there are some lots less than 2 acres in the I-1. There are non-conforming provisions that David can touch on later that allow those uses to continue and allow them to be replaced. But the idea was that for ease of review, for ease of administration, for ease of understanding by property owners, to just do it as one district. The one thing that we did do that came out of the comprehensive plan, that comes out of the development policies of the city for some time, is to identify these key gateways, these key corridors. The policy of the comprehensive plan, the direction of the city in going through that process, was to look at this area being as much or more of a business park kind of area, right? And as you drive through it, you see this. You see that there's a lot of tree-lined streets and there's a lot of really nice development, and the idea was to, in the comprehensive plan, was to create more of that. Well, that's what these changes to the I-1 do. There are 2 overlays. And again, I apologize if everybody's eyes are glazing over, but this is the most detailed part of the show tonight. The Thorndale corridor corporate overlay exists now. It was amended last in November of 2020 to make some refinements to the land uses that were permitted. This has been working, and this is proposed to stay. This Thorndale interchange overlay identifies an area that is right at the interchange of Wooddale Road and I-390 and it creates rules for development of more modern formats of development. So you'll remember from previous plans, you'll remember from the current UDO that there's this notion of the corporate Main Street and a really high-end kind of development approach to a business park area. What the comprehensive plan did and what the UDO defines now is that this area is just as appropriate for some form of significant development, with the understanding that the way these things happen now is more in squares than in strips, is probably the easiest way to define it. Bless you. Off-street parking and loading. Off-street parking and loading was all right. We've added a few things. The shared parking standard was kind of complicated. Shared parking is something that you want to encourage, and there were a lot of hoops to go through for users of adjacent properties or users on the same property to share. So we've made that a development administrator process so that we can make that easier for businesses. We've added bicycle parking, which is now a modern aspect of a lot of codes. We've added land banking to the code. So the idea of land banking is if somebody comes and it's typically used for industrial properties. If somebody says, look, your code says I've got to do 100 parking spaces, but the business that I have now, we don't have that many employees, data center maybe, right? We really only need 25. What this does is this says, you know what, all right, don't build all 100 now, leave the space for the 100, leave it as grass, leave it as a natural area. If the next user comes in and they need the parking spaces, they'll install it. So this is a very modern, very green, very sustainable kind of approach to doing it. Landscaping going along with that. Again, the landscaping section had a lot in it, had a lot of really good stuff in it. It was kind of hard to maneuver its way through. So what we did was we created more concise, clear, easy to understand sections of it. But we added a couple of things. This graphic that's up here is a notion of pedestrian safety that's included in there, so that there are, thank you. Just throw stuff at me, I'll catch on. So this graphic talks about the notion of pedestrian safety, that if you've got a really big parking lot, that you need to make it a little easier for pedestrians to move through the parking lot. And this is something that a land planner would know if they came to do a large site, that they would know that they were going to be doing this. This section includes transitional requirements between commercial and residential uses. There's an exemption for alleys because you really can't do that if there's an alley. The requirement to put in landscaping was changed from 20 spaces to 10 spaces, again, to be a little bit more user-friendly, a little bit more, a little less stress for the developer and the property owner. The other thing that this section does is it allows the development administrator to grant relief in unique circumstances. I can't give you a whole lot of examples because they're unique, but sometimes you can't fit all the trees, right? There's a classic example of if you tear down trees, or if you take down trees, you have to replace them. Well, sometimes you don't have enough room to put the trees down, right? And so the authority to just grant that relief is now vested with the development administrator, and it's a much more business-friendly, much more development-friendly approach. The other thing that's in there is the Thorndale corridor regulations that were in the current code are now in here as best management practices. Not requirements, but advancing the idea of stormwater management, of using native plantings, which are much more effective at absorbing stormwater and cleaning the water before it runs off the site. Again, these are sustainable ideas that people weren't putting into codes 10 years ago that now are more commonplace.
Okay, nonconformities. Every zoning code has a nonconformities article, section, chapter, whatever. This is very important, particularly when a community is going through an exercise such as this one, where it is significantly changing its zoning regulations. That has impacts upon existing property owners who develop their properties according to prior code provisions that may no longer exist. What the nonconformity provisions allow is those properties to continue as they're being used in the configuration that they're being used in. However, in certain circumstances, it may trigger that they have to come into conformity with the new regulations. These are also some of the hardest provisions to get right. These are often very confusing provisions for a lay reader to look at. There's a lot of similar language concerning very different things. So when we look at these, we try to always think about how to organize it into a fashion that's logical to a reader using very consistent language. One of the things we had encountered in the code is a lot of issues with consistency of language. So it was cleaning that up. And that's not uncommon either. When a code's been around for a while and it gets amended, sometimes new words are added in that mean that were different words were used in an earlier variation of the code. So we reorganized it and added provisions to establish authority and procedure more clearly through the non-conforming regulations concerning structures, concerning lots, and concerning uses. Those are your three main areas that you're going to be dealing with non-conformities. Again, better structure and clearer delegated authority to the development administrator to grant limited non-conforming exceptions for uses and expanded improvements under specific conditions. So there may be instances where a non-conforming lot somehow is able to expand the size of its property and they want to expand the intensity of the use. There's now provisions built in that would allow the development administrator through an administrative process with procedure to grant a limited exception to the otherwise applicable non-conforming regulations. We also added new provisions to define cases where those limited exceptions can be granted, establish procedures the property owner must follow to obtain a limited exception, as well as review criteria, set timing for decisions so property owners have a reasonable understanding as to when they may be able to expect a decision from the development administrator, and then outlined a procedure for a property owner who's not happy with the development administrator's decision to seek appeal from the Community Development Commission. In addition, there are provisions in there for variations from some of the non-conforming provisions as well. Okay, subdivisions. As Michael said, you have a UDO, so your subdivision regulations are a part of, are tied in with your zoning regulations. This was a full reorganization and rewrite. We found that the subdivision provisions that the city was working with were somewhat antiquated and required some updating, as well as finishing some ideas that were presented in them. So again, we fully reorganized and rewrote the section. We added provisions for both major and minor subdivisions and other plat actions. We updated the performance guarantee requirements, and I'll get into these a little bit more, as well as methods for seeking modifications from subdivisions. A lot of times what happens in subdivision codes is you carry in zoning language, and they're two very distinct processes. Subdivisions do not, changes to subdivisions, seeking what would commonly be known as variations from subdivision regulations, we prefer to call those modifications because, again, it's not subject to the same formal process that a zoning variation would present. Major subdivisions are subdivisions of more than 4 lots. We've put in provisions for minor subdivisions that can be handled administratively. In a built-out community like Wooddale, that's a benefit to property owners. They won't have to go through a lot of formal process. They can work with staff on seeking minor subdivision approvals. We've updated, as said, the performance guarantees for public improvements associated with subdivisions that are laid out in standards and specifications that the city has. And again, ways to seek modifications from the regulations, as well as amendment to the subdivision regulations themselves. Again, amendments to subdivision regulations may come before you, but they don't come before you in the formality of a public hearing. They come before you as a public meeting. So it's a very different process than zoning. One of the things that was presented in your subdivision regulations was school and parkland donation and impact fees. These are specifically authorized by state statute, and most communities do have these to defray added costs related to the burdens of adding an extra population to the school and park systems, to ensure that there's adequate parkland, to ensure that there's adequate classroom facilities, and other school infrastructure. You had this, you didn't have a quantitative way to establish it. That's now all built in. standard provisions that are used throughout the state that are legally well tested have now been built into the subdivision regulations that are before you as draft provisions tonight.
Home stretch, folks, I promise. Performance standards is a little known and not necessarily often used part of the zoning ordinance, but what it does is it sets the standards by which business uses, primarily industrial uses, operate. It regulates noise, odors, vibration, that sort of thing. The one that was in the current code was a model that we see in a lot of different ordinances. I kid you not when I tell you that I think somebody wrote one of these in the 1950s and it got cut and pasted into zoning ordinances over and over again since. It talks about light meters and Ringelmann charts and sound and decibel meters. As I said, having been a community development director, I can tell you it is impossible to manage and regulate these things. What we've done with the performance standard here is we have trued them up to state statutes and basically made state statutes the standard. You still have a nuisance ordinance, so if there is something that is just a flat-out nuisance, that can certainly be regulated. But in terms of these performance standards, they now reflect state statutes, which, one, is easier as a municipality to enforce, and two, there's more predictability for the business world and for the property owners to know what the standards are. They're not meeting two separate standards, they're meeting one. And these are standards that are set by the state that are there to protect residents. So aside from that, the primary change there is it's currently applied only to manufacturing districts, but the UDO, the update, includes it in commercial districts, because you could conceivably have these same issues of noise and so on and so forth. So that's what that's about. Design guidelines are just that. They are part of a zoning ordinance, which is not absolutely thou shalt. It is a set of, and if you've had a chance to read it, you've seen this, they are a set of standards about what one should try to accomplish. And so there are things in there about industrial buildings where it says highlight where the entrance to the building is located. So these are not very specific instructions, like you have to have this much brick or you have to have this much stone. You have to. It's not intended to do that. What it's intended to do is to have a development that is familiar, that is of high quality, that reflects the character of the development that's laid out as part of city development policy and the comprehensive plan. The thing that's great about these is that they give architects, designers, land planners a heads up before they ever start taking pen to paper or computer to whatever it gets taken to these days, so that they know what the city expects and they can build this in. This is actually a benefit to the developer and the property owner because they don't have to go through kind of an iterative process. This will apply to commercial and industrial buildings. When it happens to a brand new building, these standards would be things that would come before you all and the city council and would be part of the discussion there. If somebody is just doing elements of a building or doing an addition, it would be done administratively through the site plan review process. This is something that we find works really well for communities because it's a way of setting a bar without being so prescriptive that you take away creativity and flexibility. And last but not least,
This is it. Yes, so the enforcement and penalties provision, basically, if you violate the code, this is what could happen to you. The current provisions that the city has are buried in Chapter 2 of the UDO. We have relocated them all to this new Article 11 that's at the very end of the UDO. And it is reorganized and updates the city's powers while preserving private remedies. And it follows current state law.
Before we close and say thank you again for your attention and your time, I would just ask Gosha and David if there was anything that I ran through that missed or we want to make sure that the CDC is aware of or anything. So with that, we, again, thank you for your time and the opportunity to work with you on this rather important project, and we're glad to be part of the discussion and answer questions you may have. If there are questions about the specific minutia or details that we may not remember, we may have to look into it and get back to you, but we look forward to discussing this with you.
Okay, great. Is there any member of the CDC who has Any questions for our staff or our consultants?
Yes, I'll start with Gosha. You said we had residents and aldermen had meetings on, when you were putting this together. Can you tell me how many meetings?
There were 4 meetings, 4 UDO
Okay.
steering committee meetings, yes.
My next question is for Mike. What other towns have you wrote UDOs for that are actually using them?
We finished one in, that we did with Ansel Glink in Bourbonnais, Illinois, down south. Recently had one adopted in Rolling Meadows that they adopted. Those are not UDOs, those focused on zoning and signs. So they didn't include the subdivision element, but those are the 2 that we've completed together recently. We're working on a couple others that are now currently at about this stage in the process.
And you said it took you about 2 years to do this?
Yeah.
So 2 years to put it together. You needed 4 meetings with aldermen and people from the community, and you want us to do all this in one night. Does that seem real
One
fair
thing
to you?
There's always an option to continue if there's a need for it. I did want to add, our first steering committee, I think, happened on March 5th, 2020. So as we all remember, unfortunately, 2 weeks after that, everything shut down for about a year. So we did not have any steering committees for over a year. So that's what we picked up again last year and started having the meetings. So that was unfortunately a big effect, because part of it is, it was a group effort. Our consultants did an amazing job looking at our existing regulations and trying to modernize it. But there was staff input, there was review from other departments in the city, and also the opportunities. So the steering committee was appointed by the mayor, so all the members were appointed by the mayor, and the entire UDO was divided into chapters. So obviously it's a lot of material, and it took a lot of time, but unfortunately the major setback was the shutdown and everything that was related to COVID. Usually, hopefully, the process isn't supposed to take this long.
But it would have still been 4 meetings or 2 longer meetings, whatever it may be. It's still short-sighting us here. I mean, we've had 4 days, which not all of us have every minute of every day to go over this. I mean, I think it should have been split up into 2 sections at least, over 2 meetings. I mean, I think this is a little bit too much to pass all in one evening. And one last thing, you made a statement that I really didn't care for about, well, if you don't have room for the trees, you can get rid of trees. We're known for trees in Wooddale. It's probably the last thing in the world we want to get rid of.
Then let me clarify, because that's a great point, and I apologize for sharing it incorrectly. What will happen a lot of times as part of a development is you'll have to take down some trees, right? And it's a tree preservation and replacement ordinance. And what it requires is that you replace those trees. You can't always fit all of the trees, because if you're replacing bigger trees, you know how this works, right? You're replacing bigger trees, you gotta have fewer. If you can't fit them, there's a fee in lieu option, so that there's a fund that the municipalities use to plant more trees elsewhere. I'm not trying to get rid of trees, I apologize if that's what it sounded like.
Or maybe that project should have been ever so slightly smaller to fit a few more trees.
Which is always a possibility, which is why a lot of these things come before you as special uses.
Any other questions from the CDC?
Question, is there, for the C1, is there a list of what is considered a neighborhood commercial business? Do we have a list inside the UDO that will state this is what a C1 is?
I would actually refer you to the use table that's in the,
Okay.
that's in the UDO.
So there is a list.
There's a list. There's a list of permitted uses in the use table that'll specify what those are. And what you'll see is there are some uses that are divided by size, right? So the larger version of a grocery store, a small, like a small 7-Eleven kind of thing might be appropriate for the C1, but a larger grocery store is more for a C2. So that list of what they are is the use list. I would tell you too, there's not a whole lot of difference in terms of the types of businesses. It's generally going to be the size. Obviously, those small lots on Irving Park are going to have a very different kind of type of shopper or how far people come to go than would Target, for instance.
So, with that said, so is it possible for a C2, something that is zoned as C2, to put up something that would be considered a C1?
Yes. In fact, if you pull, and I do have it, I don't have it loaded up. But yes,
So
the
yes.
short answer is yes.
Okay.
And the
So-
answer to this one is the new standard.
So there is benefit, a little bit more benefit to being a C2 than a C1? Because a C2, you can go both ways, C2, maybe C1? No.
Is it cumulative?
Hold on. Gosha's gonna try and find it for us.
I guess what I'm trying to get to, on Irving Park, we got that C1 on the northeast corner, but on the southwest corner of Irving Park, we got a C2, and they're kind of similar in size.
Sarah, this is a lot. Thank you for finding this, Gosha.
Okay.
It likes you.
There.
Um, So, now, let me do that. So this column here is the C1, and this is the C2. And if you scroll down, and how do I make this bigger? So as you scroll down, you will see that the difference between the C1 and the C2. And this was built from the existing code, so the idea was not to create this out of whole cloth. But what you'll see is these Ps for permitted use and S for special uses, and again, it's these two columns right here. They're generally similar, right? So it's not that C2 lets you have a whole lot more stuff than C1 would. It's that on a C1 lot, you're just not going to be able to build as big a version of it, just because the lot's smaller.
So the lots on C1 on the northeast corner of Irving Park are kind of similar in size to the southwest corner lots? But the southwest corner lots are C2? And right next to the C1, we have a C2? On the northeast corner of Irving Park Road? Or am I looking at the wrong map?
I know at the west side of
I
town,
just
Irving
don't know
Park.
why we're gonna, looking at right here, C2, C1. Why we're gonna go C2 and C1 and not just make them C2 if that's gonna give the property owner the flexibility and the advantage to build big or build small, or combine lots.
So the idea, it's a great question. So the idea of doing this was where is there the opportunity to create larger lots? The point was where it might not be as easy to create larger lots, we didn't want to hamstring C1 property owners and require them to put together properties that they couldn't add enough to get a C2 lot. So again, the uses are generally the same, but the existing C1 lots are just going to be smaller. Am I getting to where you're going? I'm
No,
not sure.
I hear you completely. I just see that the lots are small, right?
Well-
C1, and then I'm looking at small lots on C2 on the south,
Right, so, I get it now. Thank you. So the lots that you're looking at, those are the platted lots that are there now.
Right.
Right? And so what this effectively says is that for C2 and even for some of the C1, it might be necessary to put some of those together. In some cases, that might be as simple as the minor subdivision process that David was talking about. Right? So it's not always a big rigmarole, but the idea is to have a larger lot for a development that's more in keeping with the policy of the plan and is an easier piece to develop on, that a property owner developer could do it without coming to you and looking for a bunch of variations.
okay, I get it. Fair enough. Let's-
Are there any more questions of the CDC members?
One more. Mike, the C3, that's south of the tracks by Ash. I see you're redoing a lot of that and changing it on what they can have there. Now, it's been a problem area because we have residents stuck in business and we all know it's a problem, but at the same time, you just can't tell business owners who've been in there 20, 30 years that that's it, the minute their lease is up or whatever, or they change anything, they're done. I mean, you gotta give somebody an answer to something, to do something. I mean, you don't have anywhere near the items that you can have on here that is there right now.
So, and the point's a good one.
And don't get me wrong, some of it I do believe should be, but, you know,
Sure, so let's talk about how we can figure this out together, right? So the column at the far right, just so everybody can see now, is that C3, and I guess I gotta make it a little smaller so the rest of this fits. Oh, no, maybe I just do this. Right, and so what you will see is you will see, just as you pointed out, Commissioner Woods, there are fewer types of things that can happen there, right? And that's the intent. What we tried to do was to take the things that are there now and include them in this C3. So not to say, if you're there now, get lost. The idea was to say, if you're there now, you can stay, but as time changes, that there are similar types of things that go on. And that's how we got to this C3 list. If there are other ideas about what to add or what it should reflect, that's certainly a policy decision on the part of the city, but
Well,
that was what we went through to try and do it.
I was reading through them, and I don't know that we would have a monument company there, or a radio station, or, I mean, it just doesn't seem anywhere near the size. You're taking away, I believe there's a few automotive places, there's a scrap yard, something else. Now, some of those automotive places, I'm not sure, but that might be leased out to them. So if somebody builds up a business, that business is only worth what somebody's willing to lease it back out for. So if you say that once he's gone, he loses all of it.
Well, the way we've got it listed here, it's a special use, right? And so if the use is permitted, the way that it can continue, always deferring to David on stuff like this, but it can continue with the same sort of use or some other permitted or special use.
They would have to come in and get their own special use, a subsequent operator, but it could continue.
Keyword
When you
could.
run into a situation where you have to give up a non-conforming use is if the use is abandoned for a certain consecutive period of time.
Correct.
And that's laid out in the non-conforming use provisions that we've presented.
Any other questions of the CDC members? Okay, so what we'll do now is we're going to open up to the public, okay? And so what I would like you to do is we'll take one at a time. You'll approach the podium. Again, state your name, spell your name, please, so that we can get it down for our minutes. And just kindly give your address, and you can make your statements. What I would ask is if you have questions, our consultants and staff will write those down. Once you're finished making your comments, asking your questions, we'll address them at the end, at the conclusion of your presentation. So is there anybody who would like to make a statement or, okay, sir, can you please approach the podium?
And you will state your name and address, please?
Sure, Michael Plum with Lean Associates Commercial Real Estate.
Would you spell your last name?
Plum is Plumb,
Okay. And the address?
9450 West Bryn Mawr Avenue, Suite 550, Rosemont.
Thank you.
And you can go ahead, sir.
Thanks. I do business in Wooddale, have been for about 20 years. I also own real estate in Wooddale. I've worked with these gentlemen before, actually, in Gosha, past administrations. I guess I've got a couple of questions. One is, we referred to a development administrator. Who is that?
And why don't, we'll get your list of questions, and then I'll have
Sure,
staff
so
make
that's one question.
Okay.
I've also been on steering committees, similar to what happened here. I have not been on this one. I guess the big point I'd like to make, and another which will be followed by a question, is what is the status of Wooddale's Community Development Director position? That's a big question. In my opinion, that's a liaison to the community. It's a liaison to the companies that I work with, to the developers that I work with, to the middle market and small businesses that I work with. I try and bring them into the community. I've been doing it for 2 decades. and I try and grow the ones that are here. But there's all kinds of need for interpretation, whether it's this UDO or it's the old zoning code, interpretation of the comprehensive plan. You name it, there's all kinds of needs for somebody to be a liaison to the business community, to myself, that's trying to grow the business community. And it's very difficult, more difficult than it's ever been in 2 decades, to get something done in Wooddale right now. And I'm hearing it from my customers, from my clients, that there's nobody to pick the phone up and speak with. And so that's the main reason for me being here. You have some good people working on this. I've worked with them. You have some real good people. But we need a liaison for the business community, for myself, to encourage that business community to keep growing. And it's not there right now. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Do we define who is the director? It's development administrator. I don't remember that.
So I believe the gentleman's first question had to do with the reference to the development administrator in the draft UDO. I believe it's the same in the current one as well.
Yeah, it is, yeah. Gosha. Well, it's typically, you're, in your org chart, would that be you? I mean, that's,
It's
okay.
whoever, so essentially, the development administrator would be whoever the city manager assigns to be the developer administrator. At this point, it would probably be my position, which is the senior planner.
Okay. And the gentleman's second question had to do with the status of the city employing a community development director. Obviously, tonight, we're here for questions on zoning on the draft UDO. Your question's very well taken. That is an administrative question, and I'd encourage you to reach out to the city administrator and your alderman on that particular question. Just tonight we're just on zoning matters right now, but it's very well taken.
One last thing. Regardless of what's done here with this UDO, it's not going to work without a community development director. It's not going to work well anymore.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, is there anyone else who would like to make a statement? Mr. Subak?
Can I do handouts too? Can I approach?
Absolutely.
Marshall, your address, please.
I grew up right down the street from you, Mr. Geppetta. I would expect you to remember it. So,
I knew you when you were this little.
for the record, my name is Marshall Subak, S-U-B-A-C-H. I'm here on behalf of Mike Latoria, who is the owner of Martel Investments LLC. I reside at 168 South Central Avenue in Wooddale.
Thank you.
And Sean, just to clear, are we going to be able to ask questions, like do cross-examination of the 2 witnesses that spoke?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want us to submit those questions to you and then, or we get to ask them directly?
You can ask them from the podium.
Thank you. Wait, there's more.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, and just for the record, Mr. Subak has passed out 2 exhibits. The first one has to do with C3 zoning along Potter Street. And it looks like some recommendations as to that. The second handout is portions of is this the draft
No, this is the
Mr. Smith?
existing
Existing, okay.
UDO permitted uses.
So there's portions of the existing UDO, and it looks like section 17.503, table of permitted uses.
All right, again, for the record, I represent Mike Latoria. He owns 353, 355, 357, 359, and 401 East Potter in Wooddale. My client has been involved with these properties since 1982 or 1983. He actually built all these buildings with his father. All the buildings were built according to code in Wooddale. There is limited parking for all the buildings over there. These buildings were originally, back in the day, zoned manufacturing. Some of these buildings actually predate the houses that are across the street. The uses have always been manufacturing and industrial uses. That's how the buildings were designed and approved by the city of Wooddale. This was tool and die shops, fabrication shops, granite shops, automotive uses. There are all kinds of these examples. The sad thing is, you've seen over time, it's been less and less manufacturing uses and more towards the automotive. Not that there's anything wrong with automotive, but someday, if as a country we can bring back the manufacturing, this could actually be a thriving part of Wooddale for small businesses. When the city rezoned this property from M1 to I1, light industrial, it carried over all the manufacturing uses that were part of the M1. It was the fair and the right thing to do. Under the current zoning for I1, and that's what I passed out to you here, and I understand the consultant saying we've combined a lot of stuff to make it easier and more user-friendly. I disagree with that. Under the I1 before, we had 121 permitted uses. A permitted use, as you know, is one that you can just apply for. Still got to get a business license, but then you can operate your business. With a special use, you have to hire a lawyer, not a bad thing. You have to pay fees, you have to pay accountants, you have to do a site plan, you have to go through all this regulation and then hope that this board says yes. And then you get to the city council and you have to hope they say yes. So it's regulation in order to get a special use permit. It's not an automatic. Under the current code as proposed, which the consultant said, great, it's only 2 pages. For those 2 pages, my client got 6 permitted uses. 6. A reduction of 121 to 6 uses is simply not fair, and it's not a minimum effect of what's going to happen. The UDO revises or rezones this property from I1 to C3. Throughout the presentation, the consultant says, we don't want to get into the details. We don't want to get into details. The devil's in the details. This is these people's livelihoods. This is their retirement. And as Mr. Wood said, it shouldn't be decided at one quick meeting as to what's going to happen with this going forward. Let's start by talking about the notice. On March 9th, my client and everybody here got a letter from Gosha that said, we're rewriting the UDO, we're going to do some rezoning, just minor things. Her initial presentation, and I like Gosha, she does a good job. It's not about what she's doing, but everybody makes it seem like these are like small housekeeping measures. This is far from housekeeping. This is a massive rewrite of the zoning code and the UDO. It's 240 pages. Now, when Gosha sent this out, she uses words like, for the downzoning, and that's what's happening to my client, it'll not affect how you can use your existing property. The changes will be fairly minor and minimal impact. How is 121 uses to 6 fairly minor or minimal impact? Imagine if you own these properties. When the notice was sent out, the revised UDO was not even available. So that's my first question for the consultant. When was this sent to the city of Wooddale for staff's review?
The parts of the UDO were delivered in pieces. The final one was delivered Sunday, and it was available
Sunday.
Monday.
Sunday.
No, this was a week ago. Monday of last week? Monday of last week.
Monday the 14th, okay. And can I ask Gosha a question?
Yeah.
Gosha, under the current UDO, if my client was to do a zoning change or ask for a text amendment, we have to give 15 days notice, right? The court
Yes,
reporter
that-
can't take your head shaking up and
Yes,
down. You have
that
to
is
say yes or
correct.
no. Yes?
Yes, that's correct. That has not changed, yes.
Okay, so it's 15 days notice. Like Mr. Wood said, you picked up this on Monday or Tuesday. That's when these guys got it, and I got it. And I'm an attorney, and I couldn't even get through it in the 4 days. So if we start, let's talk about the notice. It's improper notice to begin with. This should have been sent out, or at least a link to it, when this was sent out. This gave a little short story of some minor changes, nothing big deal, you'll all be okay, and that's just not the truth. The consultant talked a lot about the comprehensive plan, and we want to follow the comprehensive plan, and we do, and the city's bound to. The comprehensive plan talks about you don't want to rezone property if it's going to adversely affect the property values. I would ask the consultant, do you believe that zoning changes from 120 uses to 6 uses will adversely affect the value of the property?
Is that accurate?
I'm not an appraiser, so I'm not going to answer.
But is that accurate to say that it's taking it 100? If we move to the broader use categories, doesn't that incorporate a number of different uses?
It incorporates more, but I don't know what the figure is. I agree with the point you're making, but I can't tell you exactly one for one as I sit here what it is.
I think it's important to understand, part of what Michael was explaining was,
I yield
and I'm
my-
not sure.
I'll yield
can
my
you-
5 minutes, we can stop the clock. We'll go ahead, counsel.
Can you bring up what he's looking at? I need to see the use. So, these are very specific. Where are the? I'm talking to Michael. Give me a second. So, here's the C3.
Another question for Gosha while they're doing this. Gosha, you said there were 4 meetings of the steering committee? On the city website, you only have agendas for 3 meetings? Is there any reason the other agenda was not posted for the other meetings?
I apologize for that. I understand the first meeting was more of an informational meeting, a kickoff meeting to meet with the members. I was not present at the meeting, so I will do my best to look at the agenda and post it.
Okay, and then there were no minutes posted for those meetings?
Okay, I will definitely look into that. Yes, those are available.
So there were minutes taken for those meetings?
That is correct.
And it was open to the public because there was more than 3 aldermen, or more than 2 aldermen
Yes.
present?
Yes, that is correct.
And were any of the property owners invited to voice their opinions at any of those steering committee meetings?
Not individually, not to the UDO steering committees.
Uh,
It was just open to all public.
So I understand trying to combine some of these uses and make them less specific, but we still have listed bakery, coffee shop. That sounds pretty specific. We have banquet hall. We have gun sales, accessory. Those are specific uses. So I think the consultant he's not giving the true detail of what's in here. What the owners along Potter Street were left with was contractor's office, this is as a permitted use, food preparation, professional offices, like a law firm or an accounting firm, tombstone and monument sales, radio and TV broadcasting studio. So instead of staying live from New York, it's Saturday night. Someday, we'll be saying live from Wooddale, it's Saturday night, and we're on Potter Street. It also allows for minor utility and public service facilities. I couldn't find that definition, to be honest with you. It's probably in there somewhere, but I couldn't find it. The consultant mentioned that there's summaries done for each of these uses, including C3. The summary for C3 talks about automotive uses. However, they make automotive use a special use. That's more regulation, that's more hoops to jump through in order to get it. If they want it to be a permitted use, they should allow it to be a permitted use. So my other question for the consultant would be, how much time was spent, how many meetings were spent on the uses for Potter Street in deciding what was a special use and what was a permitted use?
Sure. I'll look this way. The uses were part of one of the meetings that the steering committee had. We had discussions with staff about it, but it was part of one of the steering committee meetings. In terms of responding to your point, I absolutely would agree. There is a narrower list of uses. There are also uses that were permitted that are now special. In terms of a special use, just to kind of, for everybody's understanding, right, a special use is something that is not in and of itself the wrong use for the wrong place. It's a use that might have adverse impacts. So when it comes before you, it's there so that you can put conditions on the use, whether they're about how things are stored, how things are displayed, what are the hours of operation, the sorts of things that might be appropriate for an industrial or heavy commercial use that's located directly across the street from a residential use. That was the direction that came out of the process. Again, this is the start of a process. This is the public hearing. This is why we have these meetings to have this. This is not, what's in here now is an effort to follow up on that policy decision that came out of the plan to try and be more attentive to what's going on across the street from residential uses. If there is interest in having more categories or more broader uses, that's certainly, it's, and I don't want to say this to everything we talk about tonight, but these are really policy decisions of the city. We make recommendations as planners in terms of what's good across the street or down the street or for future development. But how it actually happens, like I said, these are individual documents for each city. The city decides what the policy is. This is the way it was drafted and went through the committee.
But when the public hearing is closed, it's closed. So nobody had an opportunity here to hire an expert. They get the local attorney to come in here and show you what's wrong with this. But to hire an expert, to bring in an appraiser to say what this plan will do as far as the valuation of these properties, the city got to bring their attorney from downtown, from Ansel Glink, and their consultant to present evidence. We were given this on Monday, and the hearing, and the public hearing is going to end tonight. So the first thing I would ask, Mr. Chairman, is you should continue this public hearing for minimum of one more meeting to allow all the residents and the property owners to bring in their experts, present evidence, so we actually have time to do this properly and not from the side of our hip.
All right.
I would ask the consultant, as far as why was automotive use considered a special use?
We'll just go back to the comment I made before. In and of itself, it might be fine for where it's at, but the reason to have it be a special use is if there are potential concerns about the neighbors who would come to a public hearing, or concerns about from the CDC, or concerns from the city council in terms, again, hours of operation, how things are screened, how many vehicles can be stored, where can they be stored. These are the kind of things that are typically placed as conditions, not to prohibit the use or not to limit the business in terms of whether it can be there or not, but to manage it so that it's an appropriate neighbor.
To control the external negative effects on surrounding residential properties. That's the key reason. It would be a very rare situation in almost any zoning context to have an automotive use or any type of tool and die shop, any kind of small scale light manufacturing of any kind in close proximity to residential uses like you have over there, which is a very unique situation, so that, as Michael was explaining, you can control the external negative effects on those residents and protect their property values as well.
Sure, but would you agree that if somebody's applying for a special use for automotive, one of the questions they're gonna ask is, how many parking spaces do you have available, correct?
That may come up.
And if there's not a lot of parking spaces available, they're gonna say, you know what, we're not gonna grant you the special use, and that's gonna be a use that's now can't be used, so now we're stuck with tombstone
necessarily.
sales,
Not
food
necessarily,
preparation.
Hold
because you
on.
could conceivably seek a variation if in fact that was an issue. And parking and loading is regulated through a different article in the new, in the existing UDO and the new UDO. So there may be enough parking spaces. More what you're gonna be concerned with, again, is the things that Michael was explaining: odors, noise, hours of operation, light, things that might disrupt people who want to comfortably live in their house, who happen to be across the street from this type of intensive use.
Correct,
So
and
that's why you do that.
in planning in Bourbon A, with lots of open space, that's easy to do. If we were at Bourbon A and we got to redevelop Potter Street with the residential houses, we wouldn't put it there. But guess what? A lot of these commercial buildings and manufacturing buildings were there before the residential. So arguably, the residents that moved in, and I don't live far away, knew that that was there. Mrs. Geppetta knew that all those commercial buildings were there when she moved into Montclair Lane. It was there already. They didn't come after the fact, they were there. So you have to be fair to those property owners as well. Granted, they don't vote for the mayor, they don't vote for the city council, but they matter. These are your businesses. Another question for the consultant. The code now has changed where before we had uses, and I understand it's your opinion that this is not the best practices anymore, right, to list them all out?
That's correct.
Under the new UDO that you drafted, if you're not a permitted use and you don't fall under the two-page list, you're a prohibited use by definition, correct?
No.
No?
Not
So,
precisely.
let's just see.
That's not how that
is it-
works. That's not how that works.
right.
If you have a use that's not, and this is true in any context, and it was true before with your current UDO, if a use is not listed or contemplated by the code, and the development administrator can't make an interpretation that would allow the use to slot in, there's a way that you go through a process to seek an amendment to this table you're looking at to add the use. Typically, that use would then come in if you could convince the CDC to make a positive recommendation to City Council. City Council can then adopt an ordinance that would amend that table to add that use. That has been consistent, that is how it has to work now, that's how it will work in the future.
So you have to go through that public process, correct?
You do have to go through a
I don't
public
care which
process.
one you guys answer the question. Council, if you go to page 84 of the code,
Sure.
as you draft, and I'm assuming you drafted this?
We drafted it together, but I didn't necessarily draft the use table.
Did we say greater prohibited or not? Well, there's also the interpretation, use interpretation the administrator can use.
And Marshall, what section are you
So
referring
I
to?
direct the board's attention to page 84, section 17-302, subparagraph A, subparagraph 1, where it says uses of land shall be designated as permitted, special, or temporary in table 4.5. We see that?
Yep.
I want to give them a chance to get there.
Yeah.
The second sentence, maybe I'm reading it wrong. Uses of land or structures not so designated as a permitted, special, or temporary use shall be prohibited. So, counsel, then am I reading that wrong?
Yes, it's perhaps bad language, but what that means is what I just said. There's still a process. Every zoning code has procedures that would enable someone to say, hey, look, have a meeting with staff, explain the use. Staff can make an interpretation whether the use fits within an existing category. And one of the advantages to going to the broader categories that Michael's been talking about is that you can fit more uses under those, given a reasonable interpretation and understanding of what's going on around the property, what its potential effects will be on surrounding properties, to not only protect the property valuation of the subject property, but the surrounding properties. And they can seek an amendment if in fact the use can't be found to slot in under one of the broad categories or the specific ones listed there. So they can seek an amendment to do that. And you're right, that is a process, but it is not unusual for that to be the case because it's very rare that a land use table such as this is going to account for every conceivable use in the United States economy. We just don't do that.
So
Correct,
the first
but-
step in the process is for the applicant or for the property owner to come to the community development, or the development administrator and say, this is the business I have. I don't see it specifically listed here, but I would suggest to you that it's just like this one here. Here's my business plan, here's how it's gonna work, and in any number of cases, it'll fit into that category.
So isn't having a larger list better for business to help them? Otherwise, isn't the process they have to go through and apply for a text amendment, correct?
No, what I was saying, that's what David was describing. What I'm saying is, the first step, before you have to come and amend the code, is to come to the development administrator and say, look, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm trying to, this is how I'm explaining to you that it fits into this use category or is much like this use. In which case, the development administrator can grant the authority for it to be considered a permitted use based on its similarity to what's in the table.
Mr. Subak, just because we have a lot of folks who want to speak here tonight, how much longer do you have?
Quite a bit. So if you want me to yield the floor to somebody else?
Yeah, why don't we get some other folks
I do have
in?
a witness I have to call as well.
Okay, let's get some other folks in.
Sure.
So they can share their views.
Can I just let know the committee, what I've put in front of you for, at least for the C3, is a list of uses that were allowed before. It's not all of them, but that were permitted uses that I am first asking you to continue this public hearing, the entire process, at least one more meeting to give us more time. But if you're going to make an action tonight, amend the UDO for the C3 to include these, I even wrote out the motion you can read, as permitted uses. And I'll yield the floor to the next staff.
Sir, in the middle with the beard, very nice beard.
Was that in the existing code?
Sorry, may I just provide sort of a response, a comment? I just wanted to
Yeah.
emphasize again, and maybe this is in response to one of the questions. In terms of the public notices that were sent out, the very first informational piece that went out was actually February 25th, so a little bit more than a month ago. This was the kind of more frequently asked questions for property owners that are proposed to be rezoned. The actual public hearing notice didn't go out till March 4th, which does meet that 15 days prior to the public hearing. And the draft UDO document was available online on March 13th. So that was prior to the meeting, which I understand there is a lot of documents. This is a lot of text to review. I do want to point out, as it is with any public hearing that we have, the notices that are published, they have language in there that states that CDC committee has the right to continue the public hearing if we're not able to get through all the comments, if there's more information that needs to be presented. So obviously we want to get through the matters, answer the questions that are possible, but when we scheduled the first public meeting, we didn't say it's one of two or one of four, because there's a lot of material. We didn't know what public comment we're going to have. So I just want to remind that to everyone that this is the first public hearing. If we're able to get through all of the comments and CDC is comfortable on making the motion, we can do that. If there's a need to continue, that's always an option.
Okay, thank you. Sir.
Would you state your name, please? and
Ryan Weigel, W-I-E-G-E-L.
Thank you.
Weigel
Ryan.
Two Works, which we have two locations, 935 North Central Avenue and 950 Sivert, S-I-V-E-R-T Drive.
Thank you.
So we are more of the commercial manner. We have a building, like I said, off of 390. This UDO, I want to know, for instance, if this have any impact on my business. We are 230 employees strong, 80 years in business. We are not a small little mom and pop shop like a lot of these UDOs qualify as, and we are busting by the seams. We would like to expand our property, expand the building on the 950 Seabird, for instance. And it was pretty comical to see that my buildings were zoned in for light industrial. We are far from it. We are manufacturers. If you drive in a little car called a little Tesla, we make components for them. We are a big OEM automotive producer. And I certainly cannot have a city that will not be able to cooperate with us in order to build and expand our buildings. So I want to know if this UDO has any impact on my business.
And I'm so sorry, would you mind repeating the address of the property?
935 North Central Avenue, and the adjacent property is 950 Sivert, S-I-V-E-R-T Drive. Sievert, however you want to call it.
So my understanding, your property currently is in the TCC overlay district with the underlying I-1. There really aren't that many changes that are being proposed. The overlay district will remain. The uses that are currently allowed in the overlay district, there was a modification made in November of 2020. But the idea is that they will continue, and the I-1 district is remaining. What really happened is we currently have an I-1 light industrial zoning district. That's what you are zoned right now. And you will remain an I-1 zoning district. And manufacturing, whether it's general or limited, is a permitted use and will be a permitted use. So I understand sometimes it's the language because it says light industrial or just industrial, but.
No, it was big language because we actually looked at a property off of the Norris, right next to the Public Works building. One of the city officials at that time stated it was only used for light industrial, light manufacturing. I said, okay, define that. Well, you cannot produce anything, you can only do a light assembly. We're manufacturers, so guess what? What do? Goodbye, Wooddale, we went to Bensonville. So not only do I have 2 locations, I actually have 4 now.
So, and I apologize, I don't know at what time that conversation was, but those uses, the manufacturing, both limited and general, they've been permitted since, I said, at least November 2020. They were permitted prior to that, but it may have been
And again, it's a
prior to
shame.
the-
It's a
yeah.
shame that you got a village official telling me one thing, and I
it
hear from
could have
others
been-
that it's completely not. But again, I could not penetrate past that force field to talk to somebody else. So we had others within the village, Mr. Philander, Mr. Forrest, okay? And I used to be able to talk to them. That's why we need a liaison again. We have nobody. Pick up the phone, I can't talk to me. What are these codes? What are these UDA codes? I don't know. How do you define them? I'm not a lawyer, he does a great job, but that's not my business.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who would like to make a comment? Yes, ma'am.
It's permitted, it's a permitted general and general is the proposed.
Hi, my name is Carrie Savickas, and I'm
Would you spell that, please?
Savickas.
And your first name again? I'm sorry.
Carrie,
Carrie?
Carrie.
Thank you. And your address, please?
229 North Central in Wooddale.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm actually really happy I wasn't the first person to speak because I think a lot of the things that I was going to talk about were actually addressed. One of the things that I have is reason I'm here was because of the letter I received. Mine was dated March 4th. I think I received it maybe the 4th or 5th, which it was a very interesting timing because a little different than other people here. I'm representing a partnership that owns our building. And so we were in the process of going to sell the building. And so I actually had worked extensively with a realtor, very well-known company out of the city, Chicago, who is a specialist in industrial properties. So we went through all the processing, and we were at that point. In fact, I signed the contract. He had it set up for the advertising and that. But lo and behold, I get this letter, which immediately I contact the realtor to say, hey, you know, this is what's happening. Now, the industrial realtor told me, because he said, Carrie, I have my clients that are going to be looking at this are going to be doing 1031 exchanges, so they're going to be looking for like-kind properties. Your property size is very unique and will be very helpful for my clients. He felt it would sell fairly quick, okay? So I have other people I have to answer to, so that was a positive in what these other people that are involved in this partnership wanted. So that really sort of threw me. And Gosha was very nice. I called her because I needed to understand. I didn't understand what is downsizing, downzoning, I'm sorry. So we did have some conversation on that. I'm going to make this quick because I know it's been a long night. So I'm just going to go over what some of my concerns are. And I think Wooddale, I've been up here a few times for you guys. I think you're doing a wonderful job, what you're trying to do with the city. I grew up in the area. I've lived in Wooddale. My father has owned a business. My grandfather owned a business here. So we're familiar with Wooddale for over almost 80 years. And we've owned properties in Wooddale. So one of the things that was brought up, and I think it is a very important thing, which I think in general some of the people have said, is your timeline for redevelopment. Because I've seen the projects that are good ideas, but then get stalled. And as far as a person who's going to sell a property, and now with a rezoning of our property, that immediately changed the value. And also, if I were, from what the realtor said, if I were to try to put it on with this idea, because he even told me, he goes, Carrie, we're going to have to stop on this. He said, because what happens now is you're going to have to advertise it as what the new zoning is going to be. So that changed a lot for us as far as values and things. And this is a professional who knows industrial properties. So even if a new owner were to come in and be an investor, timeline for redevelopment and getting approvals and things like that is an issue with Wooddale, okay? Because I've seen it with some of the past projects. I'm just throwing this out there. I'm not being negative to anybody. I mean, Wooddale has done some really great things. So my questions would be past projects proposed, one of them being Wooddale Road, the redirection of Wooddale Road development, the apartments around White Cottage, where are those projects at? And then I would want to know, because see, I have to answer to other people regarding our building. So what is the time frame typically from a start to finish with a new project? So if you're going to rezone properties and you're going to have somebody come in, like for my property, who it's wonderful what is proposed. I see the vision. But the problem would be, if I want to sell my property now, I mean, literally in my head, you're talking 10 years down the road for a developer to come in, only because of this unique environment we're in with the economy, with the chaos that's going on. So that is a little bit of an issue. And the reason I understand that very clearly, I was a part of the 238 East Irving Park property. So I know what happened there. I sold that property. We owned that property, 238, 232, 242. And I know that what that developer tried to do was very good, and Wooddale was very excited about it, but then we had that economic downturn. So see, that's where I come up with this idea of like, how long is this going to take? So then what is the time frame typically from start to finish, and then the current commercial vacancy rate in Wooddale and the current residential vacancy rate? See, what they want to do with our property, which I get it, it looks great, but I see some vacancies and I'm thinking, okay, what developer is going to come in and say, okay, so we're changing what this can be, But now we have commercial with, restaurants or whatever at the bottom and then apartments possibly at top. I'm not seeing it immediate for me, but I feel it's a good idea. I'm not going against that. And then I was wondering how many buildings are in the rezoning area. Obviously, I see this now, how many. And then what is the expected commercial square footage produced with this proposed change? I mean, are you guys gaining or are we losing? So these are the types of questions that I was asking. I guess with the down zoning, which is what I would be, I had a lot more to say, but I'm not going to do it because I think we've covered a lot with very educated people, including the people who worked on this. So I won't say anything more, but I do agree maybe with this gentleman that maybe we need to maybe give it a little more time to think about this or talk about it. That would be my bottom line. I have an immediate need, which would be, I want to sell my property. But now this has really put a halt. And I guess if I were to say, okay, maybe I'll keep it and then I'll redevelop it to what the village wants, and I'm glad this gentleman brought up some things that I can't afford, or nor the people involved with this, to be stuck with, do I move my business currently there, which I was told I wouldn't necessarily have to, but then now you got to look at the economics of this redevelopment. Is someone going to be able to get a loan? I mean, there's just a lot of unanswered questions. That's my only plea to the city, is just to maybe take it a little slower and let's rethink about it. That's all.
Okay.
I hope that made sense. So.
Thank you very much. Do you guys want to make any response to that
I would just
in particular? Yeah, 1 second, ma'am. No? Okay. Okay, ma'am, you would like to make, okay, go ahead.
Thank you for that. My name is Beth Nelson, Nelson. We own the property at 310 West Irving Park Road, Green Thumb Florist. I just want to piggyback because of what she started to say. I am in a zone where it would change from C1 to C2, and Mr. Ochoa mentioned, will that devalue the property? I sent a message to Gosha, who said there were 16 inquiries. She responded today at 3:26 p.m. and said, oh yeah, you can't have an apartment above your commercial space anymore. So, you'd be grandfathered in. I read those 240 pages. There was things in there about the nonconformities. It doesn't say who decides, how long they have to take to decide that I'm non-conforming, and now I have to get another permit because I have a residential occupancy. Now I need another permit because I have a business in there. It was just very, very unclear, very basic. My point to the consultants about the broad categories, there's some really different, somebody else mentioned, there's some specific things in there that say, yeah, junkyard. Nowhere does it say florist. We've been a florist in that situation, in that location, for 20 years. We had so many problems with the city, with our greenhouse, our temporary greenhouse structure in the back. They made us take it down. They made us take the roof off. Then they made us take the sides off. But you can leave the structure. Every new administration that came in changed their minds. It was maddening. We finally took it down because it was maddening. This was revenue for the city that we paid taxes every year, every spring. You guys are just not getting. Small businesses are the heart, the mom and pops. I understand and I believe all those manufacturers. I am right there with them. But this is small business. This is what grows your community. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may answer.
Oh, yes, go ahead, Gosha.
So the subject property is actually being upzoned. So currently it is zoned C1, neighborhood commercial. It's proposed to be upzoned to C2. So the idea is that the commercial uses will be a little bit expanded, and because C2 is really meant to draw from further areas, it's not just necessarily the neighborhood, but it's a broader area. So in terms of the commercial use, the florist would in my opinion, fall under probably indoor retail. So retail is permitted, will be permitted. That will not affect. The apartment unit that is on top, my response was, and I apologize if it wasn't clear enough, it can remain. The new regulations allow it to remain. However, if there's a break, so let's say there's an abandonment and the space becomes vacant, then the owners may need to apply for a special use to continue that. So it is allowed as a special use. So I think a lot of it is yes, there may be an additional process, but as of right now, the operation for the retail operation will not be affected. The operation for the residential will not be affected, assuming that there's somebody there, and obviously it's a permitted unit that goes through our rental housing program.
But if they did leave in the meantime, we would lose rent money.
There is in our
We would
code.
have to apply for a permit and start that process all
Well,
over
as
again.
long as we don't have abandonment. So typically, and I apologize, I don't remember that, there's a time period. There's a specific time period that it would be considered abandoned. But if, let's say, somebody moves in and somebody moves out and the next person moves in, obviously, right now, it's, with the real estate, it's definitely something that we probably don't have a lot of breaks, but it all depends. I don't want to make any assumptions, but there's a way for it to continue without having to apply for special use as long as there's no break.
Okay. Thank you, thank you.
One more comment was, we also have our property up for sale, and we can't sell it now if you change the zoning and nobody can have that rental income.
Sir, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, my name is Richard Malinowski, Malinowski, and my building is at 212 Ash Avenue. So I'm not very good at all this zoning and all that, so I'm just a business owner. And I bought that building approximately 10 years ago. I was in Chicago, and in good faith, moved my entire business out here, which is not a big deal, but we're a small business, and it is a big deal, you know. And that building is for that area, it's a 2-story brick building. It's right next to the railroad tracks, between the railroad tracks and the alley. And then from the alley to Irving, the city, whoever, knocked down those properties on Irving, so there's like an empty field there now. And I'm concerned because I'm not sure about, is my business the way it is? Is it grandfathered in now? Like, I've been there now for a while. Now, they want to change mine from this I-1 to, was it C2A? C2A.
C2A.
So C2A, Mike, I didn't catch his last name, but the fellow in the middle was mentioning, well, this section here with C2A, you know, we could have development that we might even, you know, it might even be able to be developed all the way to the railroad tracks. Well, my building's over there. So in order to develop it, they'd have to knock down my building. I would have to move. And I have no intentions of selling the building. I'm the owner-renter of this business, so I don't rent it out to anybody. So this would affect me dramatically. And I moved here in good faith to get out of the city with all the problems in Chicago. We were near Grand and Pulaski. It was a very dangerous area. It's even more dangerous now, so I'm happy I did move to Wooddale. But with this happening, I'm kind of regretting if this is true. If this is true, that I'm going to have to, there's no way you could alter that building. It's this huge brick building. I mean, if there were any kind of new regulations put on it, it would be a major task to alter that building. But I'm suspecting that this was changed to, you know, it's next to a railroad track. So I don't know what kind of a fancy business you're going to have with a train blaring right next to you, but it is like an industrial area, you know. So just because of that, I'm suspecting, hopefully falsely I hope, that my building wants to be rezoned because they, for some reason, want to combine the empty lots on Irving and also consume my building to put up a bigger building. There's really no other reason to change the C2A in my building except for the express purpose of knocking it down. So
Okay.
I completely disagree with it. I never would have moved to Wooddale if this was gonna happen. And I'm very angry about it. It took a lot of personal and private funds of mine to do this move.
Thank you,
So-
sir. Did you want to make a response?
Yeah, just to clarify a little bit, a change in zoning or rezoning doesn't let anybody take your property or redevelop your property unless you sell it to them. Right?
Okay,
So
well, it's not gonna be for sale. Okay, wait, all right, go ahead.
Just
Right.
as a first base, because I just want to make sure that that's understood. This doesn't mean you got to sell it to anybody. This doesn't mean somebody shows up and goes, it's mine now, because I'm going to do this big thing.
Well, they do the eminent domain stuff, which I've heard of, and,
No.
Oh,
No,
okay.
eminent domain is not something that a private developer can do.
Okay.
It's something that a city could do. Cities generally don't do it. It's not,
okay,
it's a policy question, right? So it does not take your property. This changing does not take your property from you.
Okay.
That's the first thing to understand.
all right.
And I would just go back to what I said, which talked about the opportunity for this to happen. It
Okay.
doesn't have to happen. If somebody came to you and wanted to give you a boatload of money for your building,
Well,
because
sure.
they could put together the other properties,
Sure.
this helps them do that.
Okay, I
This
see.
doesn't boot you. This doesn't say you've got a limited time. This says you can stay here until somebody wants to do something different.
Right,
And that's why I talked about the thing with the C2A is, if it only happens up against Irving Park, or doesn't happen all the way back to the tracks,
Right.
that's fine too. That district is written for that to happen as well. So
Okay.
I don't want you to think that the way this is written, or the way zoning works, quite frankly, allows
Just to-
anybody to come in and go, I want his building, and they get it. That's
all
not
right,
the
then,
case.
I'm very superstitious about stuff,
Oh,
so
I hear
thank you,
you, I
know,
understand the
I'm-
concern,
yeah.
but
All right, well, thank you very much. Okay, that was it, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is John Florina Jr., Florina. I'm representing my family that owns a apartment building on Irving Park Road, 415 East Irving Park. I guess the first thing, I just had a question. Was there any tabulation or study done as to how many properties in the city are going to be de-zoned by these proposed changes, so that we have a perspective of what we're dealing with here? Because from what I've heard from just about everybody in the room, they're looking at something being taken away from them that they've paid for, earned, developed many years ago. And in the quest to make things better in the village, in the city, and I don't think anybody's opposed to that, the existing property owners are giving something up in select areas. The comments from Mr. Subak were very appropriate to what I have to talk about, because I'm dealing with a downzoning from C2 to C1. Okay, so I appreciate Chairman Choa's question early regarding that matter. I'm in that smaller property area on Irving Park Road, north side of Irving, at the east end, Edgewood. That's the cross street. So there's a couple things that I brought forward, and I'm not going to take a lot of time because I already gave my letter. You all have a copy of it, I believe, on the committee. I was looking at this from two primary concerns, and I'm just going to reiterate those. And that is that we be able to maintain the current use of the property. The property that we developed in 1967, still have the building today. It's owned by the family. So it's been in the family, Florina family, for that long. But we wanted to make sure that we didn't lose the building as we have it and the purpose for it. We were granted zoning use of the property when it first was approved. So these changes appear to be taking away that ability. And secondly, we wanted to just make sure we were protecting our property rights here and not giving something up that we shouldn't. So there was a lot of different details I gave in here about other properties that are actually smaller. Many of them are listed as a TBC, what is at the town center, or TCB, that somehow in the past got all rezoned to that new classification as being town center on Irving Park Road, running from near Oak Street all the way to Central. But there's 8 of us left at the very east end. Many of them do have stores underneath and apartments above. And I'm surprised they're not all here today asking the same questions that I am. So those were the two main things that I was here to talk about, and it deals with C1. What I found in looking through the uses, and the table was very helpful, and I appreciate Gosha pointing it out to me. I did not find a table in the past. Apparently, there was not one. But what was very interesting, I have a multi-dwelling unit. I have 6 apartment units. Okay, the property was zoned for that, and I also have buildings around me, which I should also be able, if I wanted to reconstruct it, not that I'm planning to be able to have stores on the first floor and apartments on the second floor. The woman here was talking about that for her building, 310 West Irving, I think you said it was. I'm looking at the uses, and if you scroll up to it, you'll see under C1, there is no permitted use for apartments, for multifamily dwelling, or for dwellings with the business on the first floor. I know they're in the residential section.
Yeah, technical difficulties here, sorry.
But there's nothing there, okay? So I guess I don't exist. Dwelling units above ground floor business use. And then further on down, it's dwelling units, multiple unit. Under C1, there's nothing there, not even a special use. It should be a permitted use without having to come in front of this committee, this board, to ask for that. But I don't even have a special use that I can apply for. So again, I don't exist. I don't know what happens after this were to be passed when apartment units aren't being recognized in that respect, okay? So that was my first suggestion as to how I'd like to see it be addressed. Make sure that C1 is including both those dwelling units with the businesses underneath as well. Because otherwise I'm not sure how to go forward. I did ask the question in my letter, where do people go, where do buildings go to offer housing and businesses underneath if everything's been changed? And most of the properties on the north side of Irving, as I said, are in the town center definition or zoning class. And in reading the classification, it said it was the center, I guess, going equal distance from the middle intersection of Irving Park and Wooddale Road. Well, it only goes west a couple blocks, but it goes like 8 blocks to the east. I'm surprised we weren't included in the central zoning district there. But anyway, my first comment was to include our properties for the apartments in for the dwellings. And the second thing is I asked that the code specifically address and not leave out anything that we were previously granted for. And I don't know what it was in 1967, but all the buildings around us, even on the other side of the road in the C3 district, have apartments above and businesses below. So those are my primary questions. I just want to know what in the bigger picture, what's the perspective as to what the village or the city is dealing with in total number of properties.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Do we have a city response?
Sure, a couple of things, and thank you for the letter. It was really very clear. So the idea of residential on Irving Park or in the area around there, or residential above commercial that's there, is based on the TCP, that town center business area. It's based on the idea that as you get closer to Wooddale and Irving Park, you've got the train station there, you've got more businesses, you've got kind of a town center kind of character, you've got some recreation, outdoor recreation kind of things to do. So this was established previously. This is not something that was right now. That's part of the update only. But the idea was to focus the residential uses in this TOD, this transportation-oriented development area that's close to City Hall, it's close to the water park, the rec that's here. And so that was the idea that had been in the previous ordinance and was carried through in the comprehensive plan. Was the idea is that you get further out down Irving Park Road, that it's really more of a business area rather than a residential area. I hear very much what the gentleman said. I understand there are uses that are there and that they would become non-conforming. They don't automatically go away, but it's the process that David described earlier. Maybe you want to add a few thoughts to it.
So in any situation, if nothing happens with this table, keep in mind, nothing has changed right now. You're still existing, you're still accounted for in the UDO as you understand it. This has not been approved by the village board. We're in the middle of a public hearing process. I'm sorry, city council. And unless, if nothing changes, so no letter is associated with your apartment building, your 6-unit apartment building, you will become, as Michael was just explaining, a non-conforming use. You can continue to exist as a 6-unit apartment building. You can't expand it. If it's damaged beyond 50% of its valuation, you would have to bring whatever is rebuilt into conformity with the existing regulations. There's some other things that would apply, but you're grandfathered in, is the common way to refer to it, into the new zoning regulations. You're allowed to exist in place without change.
As long as nothing happens to my property.
Yes. That, up to exceeding 50% of its value.
Yeah, it defeats the whole purpose. It was built there for a reason. It still exists for that reason. To take that away from me is not fair. That's the property rights I was concerned about. The same for many other people that are here. You're taking things away from us. So is it just an error that it doesn't say permitted use for C1, or was that purposely left off?
The intent was to focus it around in that TCB area, residential.
Okay, so it was purposely not put on there then?
It's the draft, like David said, nothing has changed yet, but that's the draft, and that was the intent. It's
Okay.
not done yet, but that's the draft.
Well, I just want to know if it was accidentally left off. So I would ask that it be put in there. And as far as, this is just a housekeeping note, Table 4-1 that deals with minimum and maximums for footage and distances and so forth, versus 17.403, they're inconsistent. When you deal with the TCB to the TIO sections, one says max and the other says minimum. So I think one of them's wrong. I don't know which it is. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Where was that? Yeah. Okay. Did you change that? You changed the law.
Thank you. Mr. Camelucci.
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. My name is Carl Camelucci. I'm a partner at the Taft Law Firm in Chicago. We represent Gulo International Development Corporation, which through some affiliates owns a number of properties in the city of Wooddale. Of most relevance here, 880 to 890 Wooddale, 895 Wooddale, 1020 Wooddale, 959, 969, and 979 AEC Drive. Before I get started, I just want to, first of all, piggyback on the comments about the notice. It's one thing for the letter to have been sent in compliance with the code 15 days before the hearing, but the fact that the 250-page new UDO was only posted online and available for people to review 1 week before the hearing is the same thing as only having received notice of the hearing 1 week before the hearing, because we knew it was happening, but we didn't really know what the hearing would be about. We really didn't have an opportunity to read the UDO for as long as we should have. We didn't really have an opportunity to put together the type of analysis that we would have liked. So we are here to testify, but we hope that this commission will continue this hearing and take that into consideration so that all of the property owners who are affected have a fair and reasonable opportunity to evaluate the UDO and all of its complexity and detail. I'm only prepared to talk to you about more or less 3 issues tonight, but I have no doubt that there would be others if I had had more of an opportunity to review it. I'm here to talk to you primarily about the Thorndale Interchange Overlay District, which is newly proposed in the amended UDO. All of the properties that I identified before are proposed to be located within that overlay. They are also currently located in the C2 district. Some of them are also currently located in the Thorndale Corridor Commercial Overlay District. So there are 3 different zoning districts for some of these properties that apply to those properties. Let's start with some of the problems with the Thorndale interchange overlay. First of all, it's going to make the properties in that district virtually undevelopable. Now, I know that's not the stated intent of the UDO. The intent of the UDO is to foster redevelopment of these properties. But here's the problem. The minimum lot area for a new development in the Thorndale Interchange Overlay District is 20 acres. That's very large. None of the properties, or very few of them, if any, within that district are 20 acres. So the only way that you could redevelop a new project within this overlay district, if it's adopted as proposed, would be if you had the means and the wherewithal and the time and the patience to assemble multiple lots into a single 20-acre parcel that could be redeveloped as a single parcel. Most of the property owners in that area own, one or two or three parcels. Many of them only own one, and they operate existing businesses in them. Many of them are transportation and warehousing and logistics types of facilities. And if they ever needed to rebuild their building because maybe the useful life of the building had come and gone, they wouldn't be able to do it unless they could put together that property with with others to make 20 acres. So that regulation really favors large national and even international companies and developers who have the means to do an assemblage like that. That's not most of the people who own property in that area. That's other people from the outside coming in, assembling, and redeveloping. The other problem with this overlay is that every single new development needs to be redeveloped as a planned unit development. That means every single one has to come in with a preliminary plan of development, all sorts of other architectural plans to get a preliminary approval, ultimately get a final approval, have public hearings before this commission with final approval before the city council. It's a much more expensive, time-consuming, and sophisticated process than any of these property owners would currently need to go through in order to redevelop their properties today. That further favors the national, international, deep-pocketed developer and disfavors the local property owners and businesses who are located in that district today. Now, another thing that developers really like, because I represent a lot of developers, is they like certainty, and they really don't like uncertainty. Well, when you've got a property that's located in 3 different zoning districts, as many of these are, it gets kind of hard to sort out exactly which rule applies. And let me give you an example, because in 17.404.b.2, it says that the Thorndale Corridor Commercial Overlay replaces the underlying district regulations, which means if you're in the C2 district and you're in the TCC district, the TCC district regulations control. The C2 ones don't apply. But 17.404.c.1, which is about the proposed Thorndale Interchange Overlay District, says that it's only supplemental to the regulations of the underlying zoning district. It only adds some stuff on top. It doesn't replace it. Okay, so if you're in the C2, the TCC, and the TIO, which controls? The proposed UDO doesn't say, and that creates uncertainty, and even a big developer won't want to have to deal with that. So that's why I say, taken together, those regulations will make many of these properties virtually undevelopable. They'll stay the same way that they are now, for as long as the owners can hold on with those properties as they are now. Okay. Second, for all of the reasons I just mentioned, and because there's going to be a lot of challenges to developing properties in those areas, the proposed UDO is going to significantly reduce the property values of properties located in that overlay district a lot. Some maybe even to the extent of a regulatory taking. If the only market for your property is a large national or international developer that has the capacity to assemble a 20-acre parcel, all of your other buyers leave the market. What happens when there's less demand? Prices drop. Then the big guy comes in and gets a bargain and assembles all the properties when everybody's desperate. I don't think that's the intent, but that is a possible outcome of these regulations. Some of the non-conforming use regulations compound this problem. And we've heard a lot about if we rezone you and your current use is not permitted, then you're a non-conforming use and you're okay, you're grandfathered, you can stay the way you are. That's generally true, but it's a lot more complex than that. There's a lot of wrinkles sometimes. There's some wrinkles with respect to the proposed Thorndale Interchange Overlay District and the 20-acre rule. There's a provision at 17.704.A.1 that says a non-conforming lot, which means a lot that's less than 20 acres if this gets adopted, can remain, and you can still build something on it, so long as there's not a lot right next door under common ownership. So if you just own one lot that's less than 20 acres, maybe you can build on it. But some of these property owners, including my client, happen to own two parcels that are next to each other in common ownership. Together, they're still not 20 acres. Maybe they're 10, 12, whatever it is. They're not grandfathered merely by the fact that they're next to each other. They still would have to put together a 20-acre parcel. Well, then there's another rule that says 17.704.A.3. If you have two lots that are next to each other that are less than 20 acres, they have to be consolidated if you want to build on them. So let's say you own two lots next to each other that are 5 acres each. They don't add up to 20. You're not grandfathered. You can't build something on just one of them. You have to consolidate them if you want to build something on either of them. Let's say you've got one that has a perfectly good building with a good paying tenant, and you've got another where the building is older and it's kind of run down and it needs to be redeveloped. If you want to redevelop that older one, you have to knock them both down and build one big thing. That's going to discourage people from redeveloping in this community, and it's also going to drive down property values. Do you think you'll ever be able to sell that building? No, because everybody knows you can't redevelop it. I want to talk about another issue that has to do with non-conforming uses. There's a footnote to Table 4-5, which is the table of permitted uses. This is the only place this appears in the entire zoning ordinance. It says that if you have a freight yard, it must be terminated as a use within 8 months after the adoption of this UDO, even if you would be a legal non-conforming use upon adoption. Now, usually, you would find that's called amortization of a legal non-conforming use. That's what lawyers use to describe when the zoning ordinance gets adopted and there's a use that's no longer permitted. Normally, it's allowed to continue until there's a major change or 50% damage and you have to rebuild it, unless the use is amortized. And that means they say, you've got only this much time left before you must terminate your use. That's what's happening with freight yards in any district other than the I-1. It's a footnote to the table. Typically, you would have that in your non-conformity. There's an Article 7 in the proposed UDO that's all about non-conformities, and it goes into great detail about various provisions and ways to handle non-conforming uses, non-conforming structures, and non-conforming lots. It doesn't once mention the amortization of this type of use. That should not be handled in a footnote. It almost provides zero note. I missed it the first 2 times I read this. I also have a couple of questions for Mr. Silverman. I'd like to refer to 17.702.c of the proposed UDO, which has to do with how it is determined that a use is non-conforming. And I'll give you an opportunity to get there if you're...
there.
Okay, thanks. So there's a provision in C that basically says that you can request, a property owner basically can request a determination of non-conforming status. Do you agree? and that the burden of proof is on the property owner to establish non-conforming status?
Yeah.
Okay. And in C, it identifies some of the types of records and documents that a property owner can submit in order to carry its burden of establishing legal non-conforming status. And it says something to the effect of building permits and other official records of the city demonstrating that a use was lawfully established at the time that it was established is conclusive evidence of non-conforming status. Is that correct?
Yes.
So if a property owner is currently operating a use that would not be permitted after the adoption of an amendment to the zoning ordinance, but the property owner had building permits and other records from the city that were official records showing that its use was lawfully established at the time it was established, it would be a non-conforming use, right? Be conclusive evidence?
Yes.
That would carry the burden?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I think that's all I have for now.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Oh. Is there anything that the staff or consultants wanted to respond to? Not required to, but...
I think I answered his specific questions to me on the non-conforming. I don't know if there was...
Yeah, in terms of the TIO, it's a great analysis, and thank you, it's accurate. I would just like to add the context of where it comes from. The city for years has had the idea of this corporate Main Street in the TCC. There was a lot of idea about redevelopment, properties being put together and redeveloped. So that's where this notion comes from. It's one that was established in the comprehensive plan. It picked up from something that was an existing policy of the city in terms of trying to redevelop that entire area that's south of where 390 is now, and where you've actually seen redevelopment, where people, where developers have acquired collections of single-family homes and put new development there. So that's the model that this is based on. The concerns that were raised are true. They do have those limitations, but the intent is to pick up what the city had been doing previously in terms of trying to encourage that kind of redevelopment. So that's just the context for where it comes from and why. Just wanted everybody to be aware.
Thank you. Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
For the record, Brian Mraz, MRAZ. I'm an attorney. I office at 111 East Irving Park Road, Roselle, Illinois. I reside in Roselle, Illinois. I represent Lou Mattson, Amber Lighting and Electrical Services. The address of his business is 403 East Potter Avenue, Wooddale. Property is legally owned by a land trust at Itasca Bank, 11238. Mr. Subak made most of my points, as did the gentleman who just spoke, so I'll try not to be repetitious. The city has the authority to, I guess owners don't have an expectation that they have a use forever, and there can be rezoning. However, it's got to be fair. It can't be arbitrary. It can't be capricious. And in this instance, my client is proposed to be downzoned from I-1 to C3. The I-1 district had 120 permitted uses and 25 special uses. The current UDO, if he's rezoned to the C3 district, under the current UDO, there are 115 permitted uses, 34 special uses. I won't go over what the permitted uses are again, but there's 6 permitted uses. And the gentleman from Tesca talked about we're trying to make broad categories. I take exception to Mr. Silverman's response that if so what was quoted was if it's not listed as a permitted use or a special use, it's prohibited use. That I concur with. That's the quoted language that Mr. Subak read. But to say you have to go through a text amendment and just bring it to whether it's the senior planner or the development administrator and then see what happens, and then you have to go through a whole text amendment, that's months and months, folks. That's a prohibited use. There's no guarantees. That's unacceptable. That's discriminatory in taking away rights that these property owners have, and to say they're grandfathered, or in this case, a legal non-conforming use. So my client has a lot that's 68 feet wide. Its square footage is below the minimum in the C3 district. He would be a legal non-conforming use. You try and borrow money in that status. If a building burns down, you don't get to put it back up. There's only one use that council pointed out, listed in the notice or on a document that they were going to amortize out. These folks are set up, and nothing would preclude the city from changing any of those uses and amortizing them over a shorter period of time. Currently, you get to continue those uses. There was testimony unless they were abandoned or you had a casualty. But they can be taken away, and changing these uses, that it is unreasonable to go from that many. And I get the idea of categories, but those, when you look at those specific permitted uses in the C3 district, it's ridiculous. It's not so broad that it's not confiscatory, almost a taking in what is proposed here. So I would ask and hope that you would continue this hearing, not vote on this evening. This evening, I again object to the notice going through 240 pages. My client came to me. I was looking at the current UDO and only learned more recently of the changes. You can't just send a notice and say that's notice, and nobody is seeing the document that tells you the details. 240 pages, and a week to look at it. It's unacceptable. And I formally object, and I thank you. I'm not criticizing the law firm. Ansel Glink is a great firm. I've known Tesca dealt with that firm for years as well. Staff is very good, but this is an overreach, folks. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do the city consultants have any particular response to gentleman's comments? Okay, sir, you wanted to make a statement?
Hi, I'm Stephen with a V. Last name is Jamrozik, Jamrozik. Property address is,
First name again, I'm sorry.
oh yeah, Stephen with a V.
Stephen.
Yeah.
Thank you. And the address, please.
390 East Irving Park Road.
Thank you.
The building houses Majesty Maintenance. My family bought the building want to say about 1985, it could be 1986. All I know is I was still in junior high. My mother owns the building. She's 88. Around summer of 2019, she's got severe dementia. We started making plans around that time to kind of wind things down. She owns the building. That was kind of like worst case scenario. She's got funds. We're at worst case scenario. She needs 24-hour care. She's had COVID twice. It's been a lot the last few years. I understand that these plans were started to be developed in 2019. A lot's changed since 2019. A coincidence, I started talking to brokers. I told everybody, I said, when I'm ready to I got 2 months I can get out of this building, I'll start talking to people. Broke my own word, I did it in maybe 4 months out. But the brokers that I'm talking to are all saying, you've got a commercial space. Your building, I don't know, a lot of these people here are lifers. They remember what these buildings were from before I was born. They did fire engine repairs. When the city of Chicago put in the head tax, we came out here because we had hundreds of employees. We needed a lot of warehouse space, but the people didn't come in. So as far as the village, I can't complain. You guys have been great. I mean, I get that we don't bring a lot of tax revenue in, but we got to work with people. Wonderful. These brokers come in and they might be just trying to get the business. They might be trying to blow smoke at me. Everybody says, you've got industrial, that's what we need. That's what we can sell. From being in that building basically my whole life, I get why you would want, I believe Gosha put it as, the Starbucks, AT&T gas station on the other side of town. It's got, people coming from Bensonville, it's a tax revenue. It's a good plan for 2019. This is 2022. People want warehouse space. They want some kind of light manufacturing. That's what people are looking for. The fact that my building is older, and again, they're brokers, they could be blowing all kinds of smoke at me. They're like, that's good. It kind of helps these people because it's a little cheaper, they can get in, they can work on it. One of the gentlemen pointed out, and I don't know if it was my property or not, he mentioned that corner, he's like, this could be a Walgreens. I've sat in Walgreens over the last however many years, and just as a coincidence, one was small, and I looked it up, and I'm like, the average size of a Walgreens, 14,500 square feet. I got 24,500 square feet. Walgreens is going 14.5 or smaller. Maybe the lot is fine, maybe they'll demolish a building. We are right up against the railroad tracks. We're by, I call it the old Gallagher Inspect building, but there was a man up here talking about, he's by the train tracks next to where Ready Electric is. That was the guy. Yeah. And, it makes all the sense in the world to put some kind of retail where we're at, but I look at the Ready Electric lot that's vacant. I look at the Polish deli across the street, how long that's been empty. I look at the US Bank. I look at the Harris Bank that was the title loan company for a couple years. Is this the time? Is this the time to say now, this is 2020 vision? This was, with 2010 when this was talked about, I referenced that because I know what movie I saw to kill time to come to the meeting. It was a great idea to make that some kind of East Transit hub to the Metro. Everything's changed right now. And if, I might be fortunate. I might have a neighbor that's like, hey, he's looking forward and he's like, I want to leave something to my kids, and if I buy up all this land and in 10, 20 years, I'm doing great. And I'm looking at okay, my mom's good for a few years. And I'm like, God forbid that this goes out for 10, 15 years. Suppose she goes into, centennial with dementia. I just don't understand it. Right? Why now? You had a plan, but the world's changed. And I'm like, I don't get it. And as far as all the lawyers, with the points about notice and everything, when I called in to ask, hey, I got this notice, yeah, nothing was up online. It never even occurred to me to be like, oh, I'll call a day before the meeting and maybe it's gonna be up online. I thought maybe that's what this was about, was we weren't even at the part where this was. I mean, it's very slapdash. I don't know. I mean, it's not slapdash in the sense of like, it's a long-range plan and we wanna see it through, but I just think that the timing is horrible and I don't know, you've heard from all these people over here. There's a lot of fear, you know, and I understand it. I really understand it. I think that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Is there any response from the city consultants, particular to those comments?
Was mine the Walgreens?
That was that chunk, yeah.
Yeah, like this.
And you're exactly, I'm sorry, I guess there is something. You're exactly right. The lot's bigger, the Walgreens, you're right, they're like 13.5 to 14.5, but they need more parking. So that's kind of the way it works out. Again, this is all about finding opportunities to create value, so.
Do I need to go back or do it?
Yeah, if you just have a follow-up, sir, you can do it.
When my parents first started getting sick, I had the building listed for a year, and we had one offer from like a retail place, and it was an auto parts, and they just couldn't make it work. They were just like, okay, well, you've got a dock door, this is this, we'd have to try and, because the building was built in 3 stages. It was fire engine repair, then it was like more fire engine repair, and then like front offices, and they're just like, this isn't a retail building. If we jam it, maybe we could get it work. I get people all the time. I want your parking lot. I want your warehouse space. The Marathon across the street, when he closed, he's like, I want to like, he got kicked out, lost his lease. He's like, I want to keep the auto repair. I want to move in. Everybody that wants this building wants non-retail. And it's like, yeah, but we got a plan from 2019. We want to put retail in. I'm like, come on.
Thank you very much, sir. Is there anybody? Yes, sir, you have a comment.
Thanks.
Yeah, Bruce Larson, Larsen, 3844 North 25th Avenue in Schiller Park. I own a small industrial building at 385 to 395 East Potter. And I also wrote a letter, which I mistakenly left on the counter over there, didn't distribute. But I wanted to make a couple points beyond that letter about our building and who we serve with our auto repair businesses, which are currently in there. Local residents, that's who comes to our building. Local residents come there to get their cars economically fixed. Our building's been there since the early 60s. My grandfather built it when it was a gravel street. This proposal and those permitted uses, which this gentleman said were broad, including a tombstone company with no production, that's broad? I don't see it as broad. I see it as ridiculous. We are captive to prospective tenants, not permitted uses. When we get a vacancy, we have to see what type of businesses want to be there. We've served for years as an incubator for small startup businesses, most of which have grown and outgrown our building and moved on. Tool and die businesses, granite fabricators. More recently, everything is auto. I personally didn't like auto moving in because our parking situation is difficult at best. But the businesses we've had for the last 20 years will no longer be allowed. And if I get a vacancy for 90 days, it's abandoned. That's, again, it seems to me to be a taking. When I read the C3 Service Commercial District synopsis, it says, have a low impact on neighboring properties through proper site planning and architectural design. That does not apply to a building that was built in 1960 in any way, shape, or form. And that's about all I have, other than I'd like to hand this letter to your minute taker and have her read it into the minutes, and I left more copies of it over there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else would like to make a comment tonight? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Jennifer Lacona. The last name is Licona. It's 4900 Kimball Hill Drive in Rolling Meadows. But I'm with the Wooddale Historical Society. We're at 850 North Wooddale Road.
Thank you.
And currently, we're set up, I believe, as a legal nonconformance because we're a museum property in the TCC area there, which used to be I-1, I understand. So kind of just need to know exactly what we would need to do in this new proposed setup here to continue to function in the manner that we do. Because our buildings, the oldest building is from the 1840s, and the next oldest one is the 1850s, and then we have 1922, and the Historical Society started in 1972, and we acquired the property in 1973 from the Rosenwinkel family. So it's not your typical transition of property. So how would we go about resubmitting to be a legal nonconformance property? That's my question.
No. Staff or consultants?
So they'll have to get a special use.
Well, I think it might be a special use now.
One more thing, and we are a 504c3, and so we run off of donations and some of the events that we do, and the city's been very gracious in giving us donations every year for helping with running our different events. So we don't have the money to hire a big lawyer to come and help us out with things, and to hire a property manager and all these different things, so.
Well, you're a special use now, and you'll be a special use under the new regulations.
Okay, but how do we go about keeping that status?
You have that status.
I understand you're saying that we're grandfathered in, but I'm also hearing over here from these attorneys that,
No, you're not gonna be a non-conforming use. You're a special use in the district now, so you're operating with a special use permit that was granted by the city, and you'll be a special use under the new regulations. Nothing changes.
okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right, is there any other member of the public who would like to make a comment or a statement? Okay, Mr. Subak, I think you had a witness you wanted to call?
I was going to finish my examination, but I don't want to take any more time. If this board's going to continue this matter, I can wait. Just a couple questions. Gosha? I'm sorry. Under the current UDO, when you do a zoning change, is there a sign that's supposed to be posted outside the property address, correct?
I believe so. Honestly, I would have to look at the current code, and I apologize. I don't want to give you incorrect information. There are signs required in certain instances. I don't know if it's for a visa.
Sean, can you comment as a city attorney if signs are required? I believe they are.
My understanding is that all it's required is a newspaper notice.
Gosha, were any signs put out in front of these property owners that are being rezoned?
No, there is a total of 210 properties. Unfortunately, the city wouldn't have the resources to do all of that, so personal notice was sent to all of them.
Okay. For the consultants, if you go to page 121, these are the bulk area yard regulations for the C3. It says that the minimum lot area is 15,000 square feet. If my client's property is less than 15,000 square feet, and they do get there's some type of catastrophic, where the building more than 50% damage, the lot now is now a legal non-conforming lot. But can they rebuild their building?
Yes, there's provisions in the non-conforming regulations that acknowledge that you may, if you have a non-conforming lot already, you may not be able to gain additional land to make it conforming under the regulations. And if you suffer a loss at more than 50%, you could rebuild under the same footprint.
Okay. And then for the lot width, it says maximum of 100 feet? Is that a Scrivener's error where it should be minimum?
That's correct.
And then as far as on page 35, section 17-201-2, you see that?
The 17201A2, did you say?
Yes, A2, sorry.
Okay, yeah.
If I'm reading this, the development administrator, who may be GOSHA or somebody in her place, has the authority to adopt procedural rules and regulations, correct?
Yes.
So staff on their own can draft regulations for the UDO?
No, just the administration of the UDO, not regulations that would affect property rights.
Okay. It's only as far as the procedures?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a lot to get to, and I don't want to, again, if this board is indicating they're going to probably continue this hearing, I don't want to take everybody's time and go for more and call my witness.
I think you're the last one, Mr. Subak, so if you have a witness that you'd like to call, you're free to do that.
I was going to call him after I go through the rest of my questions.
Okay, continue.
Sure. On page 43, it talks about recoverable cost under fees.
Yep.
And under subparagraph 4, the property owner is required to reimburse professional and technical consultant services as a direct cost?
Yes.
So would that include, if my client redevelops his property along Potter Street, because you can't get another use in there after, and they hire your firm or the consultant's firm, we would have to, my client would have to reimburse those costs, correct?
Yes.
That's wrong. That's going to prohibit, I'm not saying he's wrong. These guys do know what they're doing, but this is going to put a real high burden on property owners if they go for a zoning change or anything to start reimbursing costs. It's okay to pay Pat Bond's fees, not because I like Pat Bond, because the city gets charged fees for drafting ordinances, but those are usually pretty nominal fees. If developers now have to pay for consultants that the city hires, those costs are going to go up and up, and as the previous attorney said, development's going to go down because this has become too cost prohibitive. On page 45, it talks about applications for zoning certificates. Under subsection V, it looks like does it require a property owner to get a registered architect or civil engineer to certify that the property is in compliance with the UDO?
Yes.
So would you agree that that would require, my client couldn't hire your firm, correct? Because that would be a conflict?
I'd have to get a waiver.
Okay, so, but they'd have to hire a law firm or an engineer, or not, an engineer or an architect to review the UDO.
This is an architectural or engineering determination that the building, as the building complies with the UDO and other city ordinances and regulations. It wouldn't be a lawyer, presumably you would be the lawyer of your client, and you would help them find this person who could do that. So it's, part of the process of that, though, is probably handled when they're going through building permit review anyway. So some of this would already be signed off on.
Okay. On page 46, it said, on subparagraph F, it talks about application for administrative variances.
Yes.
I didn't see administrative variances defined anywhere in the code, but I might have missed it.
It wasn't, but, well, I shouldn't say it's not. It is. It's just not in the definition section. And you'll have to give me a minute to.
No, that's okay.
Page 63. 63? Okay. Thank you. It's on page 63, I believe. Sorry.
63?
I think so, yeah. Okay. So it's not specifically defined, but it explains the authority. The development administrator will have the authority to grant administrative variations from the provisions of the UDO pertaining to dimensional zoning relief related to setback and height and off-street parking requirements. Administrative variations will only be permitted where the requested relief does not exceed a 5% reduction of the required dimensional or parking regulations. And then it just goes on to explain that there are objective standards the development administrator will need to follow. Many of those are similar to regular variations.
Right.
But it's a way to just better and more easily handle, not only for the city, but also the property owner, these kind of minor variations.
The small stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Is this a change that's new, or was this in the UDO?
This is new. This is new.
This is new. Yeah.
This was actually something that the steering committee talked about, because they understood that there could conceivably be situations where somebody would be, this close, and didn't want to have them have to go through a full-blown variation process over a matter of inches.
On page 50, oh, actually, I'm sorry. It starts on page 48. It talks about the application for PUD.
Yeah.
The concept plan.
Yeah.
Is there a
See
question,
it there?
Marshall?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm
here.
sorry.
Sorry.
So, it talks about schematic drawings, like a site plan, and then it talks about needing, in subparagraph 6, 7, 8, 9, a tax impact study, a traffic study, preliminary engineering, environmental resources report, development schedule of how the development is supposed to progress along timing-wise. All that is required as far as the PUD. Is that new to this UDO?
No.
That was already in the
That was
UDO?
already, yes.
In your opinion, is that too much regulation that maybe you might recommend to the city to start taking some of that stuff out if we want to encourage development, which was the idea behind this revised UDO?
I suppose that's a subjective question. I would say that this is pretty consistent with PUD regulations we see in a lot of places. It would be a policy determination by the city, but when you're doing a PUD, as you know, it's a very, it's a planned process. And it's supposed to give a lot of relief to the landowner to do creative development. So that's what creates the necessity for a lot of these plans. Now, I do believe there's a provision that enables the CDC or the development administrator to waive some of these provisions.
Okay.
And it may be under the powers of the development administrator earlier in the administration and enforcement section. It might not be specifically stated here, but it is common for the CDC perhaps, or again, the development administrator even before you get to CDC, to say, yeah, you don't need to worry about that.
Okay. When you guys revised this, was there red line versions that went back and forth between the city and your firm or the consulting firm?
You know, I can only speak for the ones that I worked at. I mean, a lot of them just would have been all red line because of the way we reorganized. It wasn't necessarily changing regulations, it was just relocating them within the section. And as a consequence, of course, that results in a lot of extra redlining.
Yeah. Is there a summary though? Because I guess we're having a hard time seeing what's the old and what's the new and comparing the two. Because we went from 140 pages to 50 pages.
Sure.
Can we get the, to you guys?
They're public records, so all of this, we wrote summary memos, both firms wrote summary memos for the provisions we were sending, delivering to the steering committee.
Okay, Sean, do we need to do a FOIA request for those, or are those on, I didn't see those on the website.
Yeah, just send a FOIA in to the city for any memos that they may have. You're absolutely entitled to do that.
That would be another reason I'd ask this committee to maybe continue the hearing one more time to give us some additional time. But I do want to, if you want me to call my witness
Yeah,
tonight?
let's do that.
I'd like to call Mike Latoria. Step up.
And Mr. Latoria has previously been sworn in, so.
I have. This is a surprise, so let's see where this goes. Give it an allowance of lead.
Thank you, Mr. Latoria. You're the owner through Markel Investments LLC at 355, 353, 357, 359, and 401 Potter?
I am.
And you developed those properties?
The family did, yes.
Okay, with your father?
Yes.
And when you originally purchased or originally developed those were zoned manufacturing?
Yes.
Then eventually the city rezoned those to I-2 or I-1?
Yes, they're currently I-1.
And when you rent those properties out, are you typically acting as the agent for the owner?
I do. Sometimes we hire a real estate agent if we're having a little problem, just to get some more exposure, yes.
Have you ever been approached during your ownership? So how long have you owned these total years?
20, 30 years, some of them are newer, older, you know.
And permits were pulled by the city for all those approvals?
Absolutely.
Have you ever been, while a unit was vacant, been approached by somebody doing food preparation to rent one of those units?
No.
Have you ever been approached by anybody holding a professional office, such as a lawyer, real estate office, accountant, to rent one of those offices?
No.
Ever been approached by anybody doing tombstone and monument sales to rent those offices?
No.
Ever been approached by a radio or TV broadcasting studio to rent any of those units?
No.
Do you know what minor utility and public service facilities is?
I'd have to guess.
I don't want you to guess. I believe that's
No.
a governmental unit. So has the city of Wooddale ever came to you and said, we'd like to lease one of your units for minor utility and public service facilities?
No, Wooddale is not, but we would consider renting to the city of Wooddale.
Okay. And your typical tenants there have been, in the last 10 years, automotive?
They are. Actually, we took on an automotive company that the city recommended that we take, and we kicked out a current tenant to fit that automotive use.
And that was a permitted use under there, correct?
Correct.
And have you had fabricators in the past?
We have.
Have you had granite guys in the past?
We have.
Have you had manufacturing, light manufacturing?
Yeah, I don't know if you can call it light manufacturing, but there was an offshoot of a tool and die shop there at one time. I think Bruce used to have a tool and die shop,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
And how big are your buildings?
The smallest one is 3,300 square feet, and the biggest one is 5,000 square feet.
And one of your employees, so you're the owner of Latoria Brothers Construction?
I am.
And your office is a contractor's office in one of those buildings, correct?
My office is in one of those buildings, correct.
And most buildings are then, have a warehouse and an office space?
Every building has a warehouse and an office space, or a warehouse, or a automotive space and an office, yes.
Okay. Nothing further.
Thanks, that was easy.
They get to cross-examine you now.
Do the city consultants have any questions?
No, we do not desire to cross-examine the witness.
Okay.
Again, I would just urge this board, there's a lot more here. The non-conforming uses is a big deal. 90 days is an extremely short period of time that you can lose your non-conforming use. If you remember, less than 2 years ago, or 2 years ago, everybody was shut down. And these business owners were the last ones to collect their rents, to keep on the tenants, and theoretically, 90 days if that tenant moved out, they would lose their legal non-conforming status. So this document, I applaud the city for trying to make it better, because the old UDO didn't allow variances. That was bad. It had a lot of bad stuff in it. It just has to be a process that's going to take some time, and to do it right, this should be taken over like a year period. Quite honestly, it should go back to the steering committee and allow each of these groups to come speak at the steering committee for one session at a time. So bring in the folks in Potter Street, bring in the people that are part of the interchange at Thorndale. Let it really get flushed out, to let the steering committee hear all those concerns and get them voiced, and then bring it back to you for the public hearing or continued public hearing, and then for eventual passage, as we can hopefully fix it. There are some good things, it just needs a little bit more work. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do want to address one thing that's come up a few times tonight, and that has to do with this 90-day abandonment issue. And in fact, there is a 90-day abandonment issue, but it concerns the non-conforming use of land. So if you're using land in a non-conforming manner, that's not allowed in the zoning district. Not a structure, but land. If you abandon the use, if you show an intent to abandon a use, and the code gets into things that evince an intent to abandon for 90 days, you would then have to subsequently use the land in a conforming nature with the district regulations. In the instance of a non-conforming structure, the non-conforming use of a structure, that is 12 consecutive months, not 90 days. So if your use is non-conforming in a structure, it's 12 consecutive months. That's an important distinction, and that's what I was getting to when I was talking about the new non-conforming article, that it's oftentimes difficult. I have problems reading non-conforming use regulations, and I have to deal with them all the time. And I have to keep checking and rechecking those regulations. So it's, just to be clear, I just wanted to clear that up, that in fact there is a 90-day, but it's not in the instances we heard. Almost all the instances we heard tonight would have been on the 12 consecutive month abandonment timetable.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there any questions CDC members would like to ask the consultants?
Well, basically not really the consultants, but I'd like to just make a few my own comments. You know, when I first came in tonight and when I got the packet end of last week, thought it was a good idea, you know, the pro-business and getting things cleared up. But as I sat here tonight, there's a lot of problems. A lot of problems. Thank God for the lawyers and the business community that spoke tonight, because it enlightened me. And, you know, I'm retired now, but I was a marketing executive in my working career, and I did a lot of creative things. And one of the things that I always did is I would go to the corporate attorney, because I did a lot of things that were, you know, a little bit different, and I would talk to them and say, you know, can I do this? Is this okay? And they would give me advice. And I've always been a pro-legal, pro-attorney, and the three attorneys that spoke tonight were very informative. And I think we should adopt an overseeing committee, probably, whether it be Marshall involved, or I'm going to call you Attorney Kay, or this gentleman, I don't know who, where. I think that's something the city can do. I don't want to spend the taxpayers' money, but I think we need somebody from the outside with knowledge of development, because that's what this is all about, developing Wooddale and then make it enticing. It's marketing. We're marketing our city. Things I heard tonight weren't marketing our city. So I think we should bring in, whether it be a committee or an attorney or a firm or whatever it is, something we can talk about later. But I think we should look into that from the CDC side to have somebody look at all these things. Because as Attorney, I'm going to call you Attorney Kay, he brought up a lot of things where he works with a lot of developers. And he brought up a lot of negatives. And that's not marketing the city of Wooddale. So, you know, I'm not prepared to vote, and I think Attorney Subak is right. We're not ready to vote on this thing. We're probably not ready to vote on this thing for a long time until we get it right, and we have to get it right because it's the future of Wooddale. One of the things that I would also request, Gosha, is that probably not a lot of, you said about 200 and some or whatever that number was, they weren't here tonight. I think we have to have another mailing and maybe even phone calls or whatever to these property owners. Do you understand what's going on? Because we got to get it right. I think all of you will agree with what I'm saying. It's for the future of Wooddale. So I would reach out to more people and postpone this thing. I guess, can I make the motion at this point?
Well, we'll see if any other CDC members have any more questions, and then we can get to that.
But anyway, that's kind of where I stand. And normally, you know, being on this committee, this is probably not the thing I would normally do. But I'm very pro-Wooddale, I'm very pro-business, and we have to get this thing right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments from the CDC?
I agree that we need to have more of the public at the steering committee, and there should have been a lot more, input from our residents during those meetings.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay.
I have one.
Yep.
All right, I am going to be for tabling this and coming back in a month. But I'd almost like to come back in 2 months, split this in half, so that we can all figure it out together and go from there. Can we do that, Gosha?
It's really up to the CDC. I don't know.
Well, that's my feeling, what I would like to do. It's gonna, you're asking us to go through a lot of stuff right here, and we had to do it, no time to do it in. We got one new member here. We have 2 missing at the moment. By splitting it up into at least half and half over 2 meetings, we've got a better chance of having everybody involved. Better chance of getting all the people here, because some people can't be here tonight. That's what all I had to say.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, so what you've heard, we've had a request from some of the members of the public to continue. Some sentiments that I've heard on the CDC is a desire to perhaps continue this matter for more comment and deliberation. So what I would suggest is that the motion be a motion to continue this matter to the next meeting date, which would be in April.
Yeah.
Is that splitting this in half?
Well, we can talk about that administratively, but.
I'd like to just make one comment. Are we, I don't know, I'm not. Are we smart enough to go through this stuff and come up with the right thing?
With everybody involved, yes. I'm talking about the community.
Yeah, yeah.
the
I mean,
city.
I still think we should have an overseer.
Well, the overseers
an-
hopefully will be sitting out there.
Well, I mean, I'm talking about an attorney to look at all this stuff, maybe at the end, maybe we go through it and then crank out
Right,
some
so-
of the obvious
So,
stuff.
Member Babowitz, the attorney that the city has hired for this project is Ansel Glink. So they are the attorney contact on this project. Obviously, we have Tesca involved as the planner consultant. So they are spearheading the project.
Are they involved with developers?
Yes. Yes.
How extensive? Or is it just one
Can
of
ask them.
5 things they do? I'm looking for a guy that knows what he's doing. I was impressed by, again, I'm going to call you Attorney K, what he said about, when he, you know, but this won't work, this won't work, this won't work. I'm listening to that stuff. That's not going to sell Wooddale. So, you know, if we could, as a group, go through it and feel comfortable, fine, we save the city some money. I'm all in favor of that. But if there's still objections, we got to get it right, that's all I'm saying.
Look, correct me if I'm wrong, Sean, the counselors in attendance will express their concerns to Gosha. Gosha will express it to David and Michael, and they will work to get it right, present it again. Audience counselors come to the meeting, and we iron out the kinks.
Can we count on you 3 attorneys to help this thing along? Are you in?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think you
Good.
can count that
Thank
those
you.
attorneys will be here at the next
Thank
meeting.
you.
I would just like some help on paying my attorney if he's gonna.
Yeah. What, maybe you can cut his lawn for the next 12 years.
Okay, so at this point, it would be, in my recommendation, if anybody would like to make a motion to continue to next month.
I would like to make a motion to continue to next month on half of this, not the full thing, and then the other half the next month after.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion, a second, discussion on that approach.
I think let's see how it goes.
Roll call.
Okay, roll call.
Mr. Babowitz,
Yes.
Mr. Ochoa,
Yes.
Mr. Surma,
Yes.
Ms. Zadko,
Yes.
and Mr. Woods.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries. This matter is continued. The public hearing is still open, and this will be continued to next month.
That's the 18th.
Yes.
The 18th.